A child was born among the tombs of the Sith, not inside a palace, not in a city, but in the shadow of the oldest darkness the galaxy had ever known. The winds of Korriban moved slowly across the red sand that day. Ancient storms carried dust through the broken valleys, across the silent statues of forgotten Sith lords. Every grain of sand had touched the bones of something that once ruled the galaxy through fear. This world had never been meant for life, and yet life still appeared there. This is the story of Darth Phobos, the hidden fear, long before the Clone Wars, long before the rise of the Empire, and thousands of years before names like Darth Vader or Darth Sidious would terrify the galaxy. Korriban was already ancient. The planet was not simply a Sith world, it was their grave. Endless tombs stretched across the surface like scars in the desert. Massive stone pyramids guarded the remains of dark lords whose names had been lost to time. Yet inside those tombs, ancient weapons slept beside bones that had once commanded entire armies. The Force was never quiet there. It moved through the valleys like a living memory, dark, heavy, patient. Those who were born on Korriban grew up surrounded by that presence. For most beings, it would have been unbearable. The darkness pressed against the mind like a constant whisper. But for some, it felt natural. Phobos was one of those rare beings. She was born a Thelan, and a species known for their unusual appearance and their rare sensitivity to the Force. Her skin carried a faint green tone, unlike the pale flesh of most humans. Blue hair would one day fall across her shoulders as she grew older, and her eyes, when the darkness finally claimed them, would burn with the yellow glow of the dark side. But when she first opened those eyes, she was only a child. No one looking at her in those early years would have imagined what she would become. So she grew up in the shadow of the Sith academies, near the Valley of the Dark Lords. Students came there from many worlds. Some were warriors raised for battle. Others were scholars who studied ancient Sith rituals carved into stone long before the Republic had ever reached the stars. All of them had come for the same reason: power. The Sith did not believe in mercy or kindness. Their teachings were simple and cruel. Strength ruled. Weakness was erased. Young initiates were trained to fight, to dominate, to destroy any rival before that rival could rise against them. Friendships rarely lasted long inside the academy walls. Trust was dangerous. Fear was everywhere. And fear was something Phobos understood very early. She did not fight like the other children. Most Sith apprentices relied on anger. They shouted, struck wildly, and poured their rage into the Force. Their power came from loud emotion. But Phobos was different. She watched. Even as a young girl, she spent long hours observing the other students. She noticed the way their voices trembled when they faced a stronger rival. She saw how their movements slowed when doubt crept into their thoughts. She learned something most Sith never truly understood. Fear was stronger than anger. Anger burned quickly, and then it faded. Fear stayed. It lived quietly inside the mind, growing stronger every time it was remembered. Phobos began to sense that fear. At first it was faint, just a strange awareness that appeared when someone nearby felt threatened. The Force carried those emotions to her like distant echoes. But as the years passed, the echoes became clearer. She could sense hesitation. She could sense dread. And slowly, she began to learn how to touch it. Some nights, when the academy halls were silent and the desert winds howled outside the stone walls, Phobos would sit alone and close her eyes. The Force moved around her, and it carried the thoughts of others through the dark corridors. a student afraid of failing their master, an apprentice terrified of punishment, a rival lying awake in the next chamber, imagining the moment they might be attacked in their sleep. Phobos listened to those fears, and something inside her began to understand them. The other initiates did not notice the change at first. To them, she was quiet, distant, a girl who rarely spoke and never joined their arguments. But the force around her was slowly becoming darker. Something ancient stirred whenever she reached out with her mind. Korriban itself seemed to recognize it. The planet had witnessed thousands of Sith come and go. Warriors, tyrants, monsters whose names had once made entire star systems tremble. But the darkness of Korriban did not react to strength alone. It reacted to hunger. And Phobos was beginning to hunger for something far more dangerous than power. She wanted control, not over armies, not over planets, over minds. Years later, many Sith would remember the same strange feeling when they spoke about her childhood. They could never explain it clearly. But when Darth Phobos finally rose, when her name became something whispered with dread, even among the Sith, some of them would remember the quiet girl who once walked those academy halls, and they would realize something unsettling. The fear had always been there, watching, learning, waiting. The tombs of Korriban were older than memory. They stood in long, silent rows across the Valley of the Dark Lords, carved from black stone that had endured thousands of years of storms. Some of those tombs belonged to Sith whose names had vanished from history. Others still carried titles that echoed through the academy halls like warnings. To the students of the Sith academies, those tombs were sacred places, but they were also places of fear. Most initiates avoided wandering too close to them. The force inside the valley felt heavy and restless, as if the spirits of the ancient Sith were still watching the living. Phobos did not avoid the valley. She walked there often. Even as a child, she felt drawn to the tombs in a way she could not explain. While the other initiates trained with lightsabers or competed for the approval of their masters, Phobos would quietly leave the academy grounds and wander down into the red desert. The winds there were always cold. Sand moved slowly across the valley floor, gathering around the bases of the great monuments. Sometimes the wind made a low sound as it passed through the ancient stone entrances, almost like distant voices whispering through the dark. Many believed those whispers were real. Phobos listened to them. She would sit near the entrance of a tomb and close her eyes, letting the force move around her. The darkness in the valley felt different from the darkness inside the academy. Inside the academy, the dark side was sharp and aggressive. It came from ambition, rivalry, and the constant struggle between apprentices. But inside the valley, the darkness was older. It was patient. It felt like something that had been waiting a very long time. Phobos did not fear it. Instead, she felt calm there. Sometimes she would remain in the valley for hours, sitting quietly while the desert wind carried dust across the ground around her. She listened to the silence. She listened to the force. And slowly, the force began to answer. The emotions of others became clearer in her mind. When initiates argued inside the academy walls, she could sense the anger even from the valley. When a student was afraid of their master's punishment, that fear reached her like a faint pulse through the force. At first, she did not know how to control these sensations. They simply appeared. But Phobos was patient. Each day she returned to the valley, letting the darkness around the tombs surround her thoughts. She learned to quiet her breathing, to slow her mind, to focus on the emotions moving through the force. Little by little, she began to understand something. Fear was not just an emotion, it was a doorway. Every being carried fear somewhere inside their mind. Even the strongest warriors had moments of doubt. Even Sith masters sometimes feared betrayal or failure, and fear made the mind weak. Phobos began to experiment with that weakness. One evening, while returning from the valley, she passed two apprentices arguing near the academy courtyard. Their voices were low but tense, each one waiting for the other to strike first. Phobos stopped and watched them from a distance. Neither of them noticed her. She closed her eyes and reached into the Force. The fear inside one of the apprentices appeared clearly in her mind. It was small, almost hidden, but it was there, and a quiet doubt about whether he was strong enough to defeat the rival standing in front of him. Phobos touched that doubt, very gently. The apprentice suddenly hesitated. His breathing changed. His hand tightened around his weapon as uncertainty crept into his thoughts. The rival noticed the hesitation and attacked immediately. The fight ended quickly. Phobos remained where she stood, silent and still, watching the outcome with calm curiosity. For the first time, she had not simply sensed fear, she had shaped it. The realization stayed with her long after the fight ended. Phobos returned to the Tomb Valley that night. She sat in the sand beneath the shadow of one of the oldest Sith monuments, the wind moving slowly through the valley as the stars appeared above Korriban's dark sky. The Force moved around her again. But now she understood something new. Fear was not just something she could feel. It was something she could use. And deep within the silent valley, surrounded by the tombs of long-dead Sith lords, a quiet truth began to grow inside her mind. Power did not always come from strength. Sometimes, it came from knowing exactly what another being was afraid of. The discovery changed everything. Phobos did not speak about what she had done in the courtyard that evening. The other apprentices never suspected that their fight had been influenced by someone standing quietly in the shadows. To them, it had simply been another duel between rivals inside the Sith Academy. But Phobos understood the truth. She had touched another mind, and that meant she could do it again. The next few weeks passed slowly inside the academy halls. Training continued as it always had. Apprentices fought in the courtyards. Masters watched from the high stone balconies, judging every movement with cold patience. Life among the Sith never paused. But Phobos had begun to see things the others did not. But when two students sparred, she could sense the hesitation inside one of them before the duel even began. When a master walked past a group of initiates, she could feel the silent dread spreading through them. Fear was everywhere. Most Sith ignored it. They believed power came only from rage and strength. Phobos had learned otherwise. She returned often to the Valley of Tombs, letting the ancient darkness of Korriban strengthen her focus. Yet the Force there felt deeper than anywhere else on the planet. It carried echoes of countless Sith who had lived and died long before her birth. Sometimes those echoes felt almost alive. On certain nights, the valley became unnaturally quiet. Even the desert winds seemed to soften, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Phobos would sit in the sand and reach into the Force again. Each time she did, the connection grew stronger. The minds around her became easier to sense. The emotions of distant students drifted toward her like faint signals through the darkness. Doubt, anxiety, quiet terror hidden beneath the proud voices of Sith apprentices. Phobos studied those feelings carefully. She did not rush. Instead, she experimented in small ways. Once she reached out to an apprentice walking alone through the academy corridor. The young student was already nervous after a difficult training session with his master. Phobos touched that nervousness, just slightly. The apprentice stopped walking. His breathing became uneven as his thoughts filled with images of failure. He looked around the empty corridor, suddenly convinced that someone was watching him. But no one was there. Phobos felt the fear grow stronger inside his mind. It spread quickly, turning simple worry into something deeper: panic. She withdrew from the connection a moment later, leaving the apprentice alone with his thoughts. From a distance, she watched him hurry away down the corridor. Phobos learned something important that night. Fear multiplied easily. A small doubt could grow into terror if it was guided carefully. That realization fascinated her. Over the following months, strange events began to occur inside the academy. Apprentices lost their focus during training. Some hesitated at the worst possible moment during duels. Others became restless, unable to explain the sudden feeling that danger surrounded them. The masters blamed weakness. Weakness was always punished. And several apprentices disappeared from the academy after failing their masters too many times. Their absence was never discussed openly. Within Sith culture, failure often ended in death. Phobos watched all of it quietly. She never revealed what she was doing. To the other students, she still appeared distant and silent. Many of them barely noticed her presence at all. She did not compete for attention. She did not challenge rivals openly. She simply observed. But inside her mind, something darker was beginning to take shape. Each time she reached into the thoughts of another being, the connection felt easier. Their fears appeared clearly before her, like hidden doors waiting to be opened. And when those doors opened, the darkness of the Force responded. Phobos began to understand that the ancient Sith buried beneath Korriban had once known this power as well. Fear was not simply an emotion, it was energy, an energy that could be drawn from another mind and turned into strength. One night, while sitting near the entrance of a massive tomb deep in the valley, Phobos felt something new. For the first time, the force around her seemed to answer back. The darkness inside the valley shifted, almost like a slow breath moving through the ancient stones. The presence felt distant, old beyond understanding, but it was aware. Phobos opened her eyes slowly and looked toward the dark entrance of the tomb. The cold air drifted outward from the stone passage, carrying the faint scent of dust and age. For a long moment, she remained still, listening. The valley was silent again, but deep inside her thoughts, a quiet certainty had already formed. The darkness of Korriban was watching her, and it approved of what she was becoming. The valley felt different after that night. Phobos returned to the academy the next morning, but the silence of the tombs remained inside her thoughts. Something in the Force had acknowledged her presence. It had not spoken. It had not revealed a voice or a clear message, but the feeling was unmistakable. The darkness of Korriban had noticed her. For most beings, such a realization would have been terrifying. The ancient Sith buried beneath the sands were remembered as monsters of unimaginable power. Their spirits were said to linger inside their tombs, guarding secrets that few living beings were meant to discover. Phobos did not feel afraid, and instead she felt watched, and strangely, she welcomed it. Days inside the academy continued to pass like they always had. Apprentices trained with lightsabers in the open courtyards. Masters observed every movement from the stone walkways above, searching for weakness in their students. The Sith valued strength above all things, but strength often revealed itself through domination and violence. Phobos had already begun to understand another path. She watched the rivalries forming between students. Every apprentice wanted to prove themselves stronger than the others. Every duel was another chance to rise higher, within the academy's cruel hierarchy. Fear lived inside those rivalries. Phobos could feel it clearly now. Sometimes it appeared before a duel even began, a flicker of doubt hidden behind a confident posture, a quiet voice in the back of someone's mind asking a dangerous question. What if I lose? And that question alone could break a Sith apprentice. Phobos reached for those thoughts again and again. She never forced them. Instead, she guided them, gently pushing doubt deeper into the minds of those around her. Rivals hesitated at the wrong moment. Apprentices lost their focus during training. Some even began to avoid certain duels altogether. To the academy masters, these failures seemed natural. Weak students were expected to fall, but Phobos knew the truth. She was shaping those outcomes, and months passed. With each passing cycle, her connection to the fears of others became stronger. The Force carried their emotions to her easily now. She could sense anxiety across entire sections of the academy, and sometimes she could taste it. Fear had a strange presence in the Force. It was sharp and restless, like electricity moving through the air before a storm. When Phobos reached toward it, the dark side responded quickly, feeding energy back into her mind. The more fear she sensed, the stronger the connection became. One evening, after a long training day, Phobos walked alone through the academy corridors. The stone walls around her were quiet, lit only by dim torches that flickered against the ancient carvings of Sith history. 2 apprentices were speaking nearby. Their voices were low, but the fear between them was impossible to miss. They were discussing her. Phobos stopped just beyond the corner of the corridor, listening without revealing herself. One of the apprentices spoke first, his voice tense. He said something felt wrong about the quiet Thelin girl who rarely fought openly. He could not explain why, but whenever she was nearby, a strange unease crept into his thoughts. The second apprentice agreed. He had noticed the same feeling. Neither of them had proof of anything, but both of them felt certain that something about Phobos was unnatural. Phobos remained perfectly still as she listened. Their fear drifted through the Force like a slow pulse. For a moment, she considered stepping into the corridor and confronting them directly, but there was no need. Instead, she reached into their thoughts. The connection formed instantly. Their quiet suspicion transformed into something deeper. The small unease they already felt began to grow rapidly, spreading through their minds like shadows filling a dark room. Their breathing changed, and one of them suddenly turned toward the empty hallway behind him, convinced that someone was watching. But the corridor remained silent. Phobos withdrew from their minds a moment later and continued walking away through the academy halls. Behind her, the 2 apprentices stood frozen in place, unable to explain the overwhelming fear now gripping their thoughts. Phobos did not look back. She already understood something that most Sith would never realize. And power did not always come from visible strength. Sometimes the greatest power came from something far quieter, something hidden, something that lived inside the thoughts of others, waiting to be awakened. And somewhere deep beneath the sands of Korriban, among the tombs of ancient Sith lords, the darkness continued to watch the young Thelin girl, waiting to see what she would become. The change was quiet. No announcement came from the Sith Masters. No ceremony marked the moment when the young Thelin girl began to step beyond the other apprentices of the academy. From the outside, everything seemed the same as it had always been. Training continued. Duels continued. Rivalries inside the academy halls grew sharper with every passing season. But inside the mind of Darth Phobos, something deeper had begun to evolve. And she no longer simply sensed fear. She understood it. The dark side of the Force had always been fueled by strong emotions: anger, hatred, pain. These were the flames that many Sith relied upon. Apprentices were taught to embrace those emotions until they could release them through violence and domination. But Phobos had discovered a different source of power: fear. Fear moved through the Force in strange ways. It did not explode like anger. It spread slowly, quietly, so often without the victim even realizing it was there. That made it far more useful. Inside the academy on Korriban, Phobos began practicing her growing ability with patience. She never acted openly. She never revealed her intentions to the other students. Instead, she observed. When two apprentices prepared for a duel, she listened to the emotions moving through their thoughts. Confidence from one, doubt from the other. Sometimes both felt afraid, but tried to hide it behind proud expressions. Phobos could feel every detail. The Force carried those emotions to her like quiet signals in the dark. At first, she touched those fears carefully, only testing how much influence she could exert without being noticed. A small push into someone's mind was often enough to change the outcome of a fight. A confident warrior might suddenly hesitate. A skilled duelist might forget a basic movement they had practiced for years. No one understood why these mistakes happened. And the Sith Masters blamed weakness. Weakness was punished quickly. Phobos remained invisible within the chaos. Weeks turned into months. During that time, her control grew stronger. One evening, a training exercise took place in the outer courtyard of the academy. Several apprentices were ordered to spar in front of their masters, while other students watched from the surrounding stone steps. The duel that followed was expected to be brief. One of the apprentices was known for his skill with a lightsaber. The other was younger and less experienced. Everyone watching believed the outcome had already been decided. Phobos stood quietly among the observing students. She reached into the Force. The fear inside the weaker apprentice appeared immediately. It was deep and sharp, fueled by the knowledge that defeat could bring severe punishment from his master. Phobos touched that fear, not violently, not forcefully, just enough to open it. The apprentice felt the change instantly. His breathing slowed, his focus sharpened. The fear inside his mind transformed into something new: determination. For a moment, the stronger duelist sensed something strange. The confidence he had felt earlier began to weaken. A quiet doubt appeared in his thoughts. The duel began. Movements that once seemed certain became uncertain. The stronger apprentice hesitated at the wrong moment. The younger one struck with unexpected speed. Within seconds, and the fight was over. The watching students murmured in surprise. The masters said nothing. To them, the result simply proved that strength could appear where it was least expected. Phobos remained silent among the crowd. She had not forced either mind to obey her. She had simply guided their fear. That realization changed something inside her. For the first time, Phobos understood that she did not need to dominate the minds of others completely. Fear already lived inside them, so all she had to do was shape it. That night, she returned once again to the tomb valley of Korriban. The ancient monument stood motionless beneath the cold stars. Sand drifted slowly across the ground, whispering against the stone entrances of the Sith tombs. Phobos sat in the silence and reached into the Force again. The fears of distant apprentices moved through the darkness around her. But now the connection felt stronger than ever before. She was no longer simply sensing those emotions. She was feeding on them. Fear was no longer something distant to her. It had become familiar. Each day inside the Sith Academy on Korriban, Phobos felt the emotions of those around her with greater clarity. What had once been faint echoes in the Force were now sharp and unmistakable. An apprentice entering a duel carried fear inside their chest long before the fight began. A student walking toward their master's chamber carried another kind of fear, the fear of punishment. Even the strongest initiates were not free from it. Fear was everywhere. Most Sith believed they were masters of emotion. They spoke about rage as the true path to power. Anger was loud. It was dramatic. It could be seen clearly during battle. But fear worked differently. Fear hid itself. It lived quietly beneath pride and arrogance, waiting for the smallest moment of weakness to appear. And when that weakness surfaced, fear spread quickly through the mind. Phobos had begun to understand how easily it could be awakened. Her experiments inside the academy continued, always subtle, always careful. She never revealed the source of the strange changes that had begun to affect the other apprentices, but many of them felt it. Some students started sleeping poorly. Others became uneasy during training exercises they had completed successfully many times before. A few even began to avoid Phobos entirely, though they could not explain why. And something about her presence unsettled them. The truth was simple. Their minds already knew she was dangerous. Phobos noticed these reactions with quiet curiosity. She never confronted those who feared her. Instead, she watched them carefully, learning how their emotions changed whenever she was nearby. One afternoon, she walked through a narrow stone corridor inside the academy. The hallway was nearly empty, except for a single apprentice standing beside the wall. The student looked nervous. Phobos could feel the fear inside him immediately. It came from a recent failure during lightsaber training. His master had warned him that another mistake would not be tolerated. The memory of that warning echoed through his mind like a distant threat. Phobos slowed her steps. As she passed him, she reached gently into the Force. The connection formed instantly. The apprentice's thoughts opened before her like a door. Images appeared inside his mind. Memories of his master's anger, of the humiliation of defeat, the quiet terror of imagining what punishment might follow another failure. Phobos touched those memories. The fear inside him deepened. His breathing became uneven. His eyes widened slightly as he looked down the empty hallway ahead of him. Something felt wrong to him, though he could not explain what it was. Phobos continued walking without looking back. Behind her, the apprentice leaned against the cold stone wall, struggling to calm the sudden panic rising inside his chest. Phobos felt the emotion through the Force. Fear had a strange taste within the dark side. It carried a sharp energy that flowed easily into her mind when she reached for it. The sensation was subtle at first, but it grew stronger each time she experienced it. That evening, she returned once again to the Valley of the Dark Lords. The ancient tombs surrounded her as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon. Korriban's sky darkened slowly, revealing distant stars above the silent desert. Phobos sat among the sand and closed her eyes. The fears of the academy students drifted through the Force toward her. They appeared one after another. Quiet doubts, hidden anxieties, secret terrors buried deep inside their thoughts. Phobos did not push them away. She welcomed them. Each emotion strengthened the connection she felt with the dark side. The more fear she sensed, the stronger she became. For centuries, Sith lords had drawn power from anger and hatred. But Phobos had discovered something different. Fear could feed the dark side just as easily, and she was learning how to consume it. The desert wind moved softly through the valley as the tombs of ancient Sith watched over her silent meditation. Deep beneath the sands of Korriban, the dark side of the Force stirred again. Phobos was no longer just a student of fear. She was becoming its master. So the academy had always been a place of quiet cruelty. Students arrived on Korriban with the same understanding. Only the strong would survive. Masters expected their apprentices to fight, betray, and outthink each other. Every hallway inside the academy carried the same silent rule. If you failed, someone stronger would take your place. For many students, this constant pressure was unbearable. But for Phobos, it became an opportunity. By now, as the quiet Thelin apprentice understood something the others did not. Every rivalry inside the academy was already filled with fear. Every duel carried doubt hidden beneath confidence. All she had to do was reach for it. One by one, the rivalries around her began to change. Two apprentices might enter a duel with equal skill. Their masters expected a fair contest. But somewhere in the middle of the fight, hesitation would appear where it had never existed before, and a student who had trained for years suddenly forgot a simple movement. Another became distracted by the strange feeling that someone was watching their thoughts. These moments were small, but inside the world of the Sith Academy, even a single moment of weakness could mean defeat. Phobos never forced the outcomes directly. Instead, she listened to the fear inside each rival and guided it carefully. A whisper of doubt placed into the right mind at the right moment could change everything. And slowly, the other apprentices began to notice. Some students who had once been confident fighters started losing more often than expected. Others seemed unable to control their emotions during training. Masters grew impatient with these sudden failures. Punishments became more common. Within the Sith Order, failure was rarely forgiven. Several apprentices disappeared from the academy after repeated defeats. Their absence was never explained openly, but the meaning was understood by everyone. And the weak had been removed. Phobos watched it all quietly. She did not celebrate these outcomes. She simply observed them. Inside her mind, every event became another lesson about how fear shaped the thoughts of others. But eventually, one rival began to look at her differently. The apprentice was older than most students inside the academy. His strength in combat had earned him the attention of several Sith masters. Many believed he would soon be chosen as a personal apprentice by one of them. As yet, over the past few weeks, his victories had begun to disappear. Duels that once ended easily for him now stretched longer than expected. His movements grew uncertain at strange moments during battle. Doubt began creeping into his thoughts whenever he prepared to fight. He could feel it. Something was wrong. One evening, the two of them crossed paths in the outer training courtyard. The red sky of Korriban was fading into darkness as the last sunlight reflected off the stone walls of the academy. Only a few students remained in the courtyard, finishing their exercises before nightfall. The apprentice stepped directly into Phobos's path. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Phobos could feel the fear inside him immediately. It was mixed with anger now. Anger at the confusion he could not explain. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet but sharp. He asked her a simple question. "What are you doing to us?" Phobos remained still. She did not answer. Instead, she looked into his eyes and allowed the force to flow gently through the space between them. The apprentice felt it instantly. The fear he had been trying to ignore suddenly surfaced with full strength. Memories of his recent failures flooded his thoughts. Every mistake he had made during training appeared clearly inside his mind, but those memories were not coming from Phobos, so they were coming from him. Phobos had only opened the door. The apprentice stepped back slightly, his breathing uneven now. The confidence he once carried had begun to fracture under the weight of his own fear. Phobos turned away from him without speaking. She walked calmly toward the academy entrance. leaving the apprentice standing alone in the fading light of Korriban's desert sky. Behind her, so the rival who had once been considered one of the strongest students in the academy stood completely still. For the first time since arriving on Korriban, he understood something terrifying. He had not been losing because he was weak. He had been losing because someone else was inside his mind, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Word of unease began to spread quietly through the academy. No one spoke about it openly in front of the Sith masters. That would have been dangerous. Yet within the Sith Order, admitting fear was often seen as weakness, and weakness, on Korriban, rarely survived long. But among the apprentices themselves, whispers began to move through the stone corridors. They spoke about the quiet Thelin girl who rarely fought. They spoke about the strange feeling that appeared whenever she was nearby. Some described it as a pressure inside their thoughts. Others said it felt like someone standing just behind them, watching their mind instead of their movements. None of them could prove anything. But the fear continued to grow. Phobos noticed the change immediately. Whenever she walked through the academy halls now, conversations sometimes stopped for a moment. Some apprentices looked away quickly as she passed. Others avoided crossing paths with her entirely. Their reactions only made the connection stronger. Fear was easier to sense when it was already waiting beneath the surface. Phobos did not try to hide what she had become, but she also did not reveal it. Instead, she continued observing the world around her with the same quiet patience she had always shown. The Sith Academy remained a place of constant competition. New rivalries formed every week as students fought to prove themselves worthy of their master's attention. Most apprentices relied on strength and aggression to win those contests. Phobos relied on understanding. She had already seen how fragile confidence could be. Even the strongest warrior carried hidden doubts somewhere inside their mind. All it took was a single moment to bring those doubts into the light. One night, a gathering of apprentices took place inside one of the academy's training chambers. Several students had been summoned by a Sith master to demonstrate their progress in combat. The chamber was wide and circular, and its walls carved with ancient Sith symbols that reflected the dim red light of Korriban's night sky outside. Phobos stood quietly among the watching students. One by one, the apprentices stepped forward to duel. Some fought with confidence. Others struggled under the intense pressure of being observed by their master. But something unusual began to happen. During one duel, a skilled fighter hesitated at the moment of attack. In another, an apprentice dropped their weapon after losing focus for only a second. The watching master frowned slightly, clearly displeased by the sudden drop in discipline. Phobos remained silent. She was not interfering with every duel. She did not need to. Fear already lived inside the minds of those students. All she had to do was guide it gently toward the surface. And once fear appeared, it spread quickly. The master eventually ended the training session early, dismissing the apprentices with a cold warning about weakness. As the students left the chamber, several of them glanced toward Phobos. Their fear was unmistakable now. They did not understand how she was doing it, but they understood something far more important. She was dangerous. Phobos walked alone through the academy halls that night, listening to the emotions drifting through the force around her. Every corridor carried quiet thoughts from the students who had returned to their chambers. A doubt, confusion, fear. Each emotion strengthened the connection she felt with the dark side. Phobos stopped near one of the large windows that overlooked the desert valley beyond the academy walls. The tombs of ancient Sith lords stood silently beneath the distant stars. For a long moment she watched the valley in silence. The darkness there felt familiar. It had watched her grow since childhood. Now, it watched her transformation. Phobos understood something clearly now. So the other apprentices feared her not because they knew the truth. They feared her because their minds had already sensed it. She was no longer simply another student inside the Sith Academy. She had become something else, something that did not rely on anger, something that did not rely on strength. She had become the thing that lived inside the minds of others, waiting patiently for the moment when their fear finally awakened. And inside the ancient shadows of Korriban, that fear was beginning to grow. The fear inside the academy did not fade. It deepened. By now, many apprentices on Korriban had begun to sense that something within their world had changed. Rivalries were no longer simple contests of strength. Duels that once followed clear patterns now ended in strange and unexpected ways. Some students lost their focus during combat. Others hesitated at the moment of victory. And sometimes, an apprentice simply disappeared. At first, no one questioned these events too closely. Within the Sith Order, disappearance was rarely unusual. The weak often vanished after angering a master. A failed apprentice might be sent away, punished, or quietly removed from the academy entirely. It was part of Sith tradition. Strength ruled, weakness ended. But the pattern that began forming around Phobos was different. The apprentices who vanished were not always weak. Some had been among the most promising students inside the academy halls. Fighters whose skill had once earned the attention of powerful Sith masters. Then suddenly, they were gone. Their chambers stood empty. Their names were no longer spoken, and no master claimed responsibility. Phobos watched these events with quiet attention. She had already learned how fear could shape the thoughts of others, but now she was beginning to understand something more dangerous. Fear could do more than weaken a rival. It could destroy them. One night, a duel was scheduled inside the lower training chambers beneath the academy. These duels were often private, observed only by a few masters and selected students. The purpose was simple: to test which apprentice was strong enough to advance. Phobos stood among the observers as two rivals entered the chamber. Both students had earned reputations for their skill. They had fought each other several times before, each victory balanced by another defeat. Tonight, and the masters expected a decisive outcome. The chamber was dimly lit, its stone floor worn smooth by centuries of combat. Ancient Sith symbols carved into the walls seemed to watch the duel in silence. The two apprentices ignited their lightsabers. The duel began. At first, the fight moved exactly as expected. Both fighters moved quickly, their blades flashing through the air as they searched for weaknesses in each other's defense. But Phobos had already reached into the Force. She found the fear inside one of them almost instantly. It was not fear of death. It was fear of humiliation. This apprentice had lost their last duel before the Watching Masters. Another defeat would end their chance of becoming a Sith apprentice under one of those masters. Phobos touched that fear, just slightly. The apprentice felt it immediately, his mind filled with memories of failure. Every mistake he had ever made in combat returned to his thoughts all at once, and his focus began to fracture. The rival saw the opening. A single strike ended the duel. The defeated apprentice collapsed to the stone floor, his lightsaber rolling from his hand. The Watching Masters studied him for a long moment in silence. Then one of them gave a quiet command. Guards entered the chamber. They removed the defeated student without a word. Phobos watched as the chamber doors closed behind them. She knew what would follow. And the Sith did not keep apprentices who failed too many times. But this time something had been different. The fear inside that rival had not appeared on its own. Phobos had awakened it. Later that night, she returned once again to the silent tomb valley outside the academy walls. The desert wind moved slowly across the ancient monuments of the Sith. Phobos stood among the tombs, feeling the dark side move through the force around her. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the truth. Her power was no longer limited to shaping emotions. She could decide who rose within the academy and who fell. One by one, the rivals around her would begin to disappear, not because she attacked them openly, but because their own fear would destroy them. And Phobos had learned exactly how to awaken it. The disappearances did not stop. At first, the Sith Masters believed the pattern was nothing more than the natural cruelty of their order. And apprentices fought constantly inside the academy on Korriban. Rivalries were encouraged. Betrayal was expected. And when one student proved stronger than another, the weaker one was often removed. It had always been that way. But slowly, the masters began to notice something unusual. The students who vanished had not all been weak. Some had been among the most capable apprentices in the academy. Warriors who had shown great promise in combat and discipline in their studies of the dark side. And yet one after another, their paths ended in sudden failure. Duels that should have been victories become humiliating defeats. Students who had once been calm during battle began to lose control of their emotions. Some froze in moments when hesitation meant death. From the outside, it looked like weakness. But inside the force, something else was happening. Phobos continued moving quietly through the academy halls, observing every rivalry that formed around her. She had learned that fear did not need to be created. It already lived inside the minds of every apprentice who trained under the Sith. All she had to do was guide it. One evening, 2 advanced students prepared for a duel inside the academy courtyard. Both had spent years training under different masters. Their skills were nearly equal, and many believed the duel would decide which of them would soon rise higher within the order. And other apprentices gathered along the stone edges of the courtyard to watch. Phobos stood among them. Neither of the duelists paid attention to her presence. Their focus remained fixed on each other as they ignited their lightsabers. The red blades illuminated the dark courtyard walls. The duel began. Phobos reached into the force as she had done many times before. The fear inside one of the duelists revealed itself immediately. It was buried beneath anger, but it was there. The warrior feared losing the respect of his master more than he feared death itself. Phobos touched that fear. The connection flowed easily now. Months of practice had sharpened her control. She no longer needed to push against another mind with force. A small influence was enough to guide the emotion, already growing there. The duelist felt it instantly. For a moment, the world around him seemed to narrow. His opponent's movements became harder to predict. Doubt slipped into his thoughts like a shadow. The fight slowed. The watching students sensed something strange, though they could not explain it. The confident warrior who had dominated many previous duels now moved with hesitation. His rival noticed. A quick strike followed, then another. Within seconds, the duel ended. The fallen warrior lay motionless on the courtyard floor, his weapon extinguished beside him. The victorious student stood breathing heavily. She was surprised by how quickly the fight had turned in his favor. The Sith Master, overseeing the duel, stepped forward. He studied the defeated apprentice with cold disappointment. Then he turned away. The message was clear. Failure had consequences. Phobos watched the outcome in silence. She had not drawn a weapon. She had not spoken a single word. Yet the result had unfolded exactly as she intended. Over the following weeks, similar events continued to occur. As rivals defeated each other in unexpected ways. Apprentices who once seemed strong lost their confidence. Masters grew increasingly impatient with what they believed to be declining discipline within the academy. But none of them saw the true cause. Phobos moved through their world like a quiet shadow. The apprentices who fell believed their failures were their own. The masters believed weakness was spreading among their students. Only Phobos understood the truth, and every defeat had been shaped by the same invisible hand. And with each passing day, the dark side of the Force answered her more easily. The fears of others fed her power, and the Sith around her were slowly destroying themselves. At first, the masters believed the chaos inside the academy was nothing unusual. The Sith had never expected peace among their students. Rivalries were encouraged. Betrayal was considered a natural step in the path toward power. When apprentices turned against each other, it often proved which of them was worthy of surviving. But the events unfolding on Korriban were beginning to feel different. Too many strong apprentices were falling. Some had been expected to rise quickly through the ranks of the academy. Their masters had spoken about them with quiet confidence. Yet one by one, those promising students were failing in strange and unexpected ways. Duels ended abruptly. Training sessions collapsed into confusion. Yet sometimes an apprentice who had once shown great discipline simply lost control of their mind during battle. The masters noticed the pattern. They began watching their students more carefully. Within the Sith order, weakness was never tolerated. But when weakness appeared suddenly among many capable apprentices at once, it raised dangerous questions. Something was wrong. The masters could feel it through the Force. The dark side within the academy had grown heavier over the past months, and it moved through the halls like a slow shadow, pressing quietly against the thoughts of those who trained there. But none of the masters could clearly identify the source. Phobos continued moving through the academy unnoticed. To the masters, she appeared no different from the other students. Quiet, focused, a capable apprentice, but not one who sought attention or glory through constant duels. Her silence protected her. The masters often focused their attention on the loudest students, so those who fought openly for power were easier to observe. Phobos did not fight that way. She studied, she watched, and she listened to the fears hidden inside every mind around her. One evening, a Sith master summoned several advanced apprentices into one of the deeper training chambers beneath the academy. The chamber was older than most parts of the complex, its walls carved with ancient Sith runes that glowed faintly in the dim red light. The master stood at the center of the chamber as the students gathered. His presence carried authority. He had begun to suspect that something unusual was happening within the academy. The apprentices sensed his tension immediately. Phobos felt their fear through the Force. The master ordered the students to demonstrate their abilities through a series of duels. He intended to observe their discipline closely, searching for the weakness that had begun spreading through his academy. The first duel began. Two apprentices ignited their lightsabers and stepped toward each other. Phobos remained silent among the watching students. She reached into the Force again. The fear within one of the duelists appeared clearly in her thoughts. This apprentice had already lost twice during the past weeks. Another defeat would likely end his place in the academy entirely. Phobos touched that fear. The connection flowed easily. The apprentice's concentration began to fracture. His movements slowed slightly as doubt crept into his mind. The master noticed it immediately. His expression darkened. The duel ended quickly. The defeated apprentice fell to one knee, breathing heavily as the master studied him with cold disappointment. Another duel followed, then another. Each time the same strange weakness appeared among the students. Moments of hesitation, sudden mistakes that experienced fighters should not have made. The Sith Master watched every movement carefully, and something was interfering with his students. He could feel it, but he could not see it. Phobos stood quietly among the watching apprentices as the final duel ended. The master dismissed the students without speaking further, but his thoughts were troubled. The dark side within the academy felt disturbed, as if some hidden force was twisting the emotions of those who trained there. Phobos walked through the corridors afterward, feeling the tension that now spread among the masters themselves. So they had begun to notice the darkness growing within their own academy, but they did not yet understand its shape. They did not yet see the quiet Thelin apprentice who moved among them like a shadow, and they did not yet realize that the fear destroying their students was no accident. It had been awakened. The suspicion did not disappear. It grew. Inside the Sith Academy on Korriban, the masters had begun to sense that something was wrong within their order. So the failures among their students were no longer isolated events. The pattern had become too clear to ignore. Strong apprentices were falling, disciplined fighters were losing their control, and the dark side itself felt disturbed. The masters spoke about it in private chambers, away from the listening ears of their students. Some believed the academy had grown careless. Others argued that the students were becoming weak, but a few masters suspected something more dangerous. They believed another Sith might be manipulating the academy from within. Such betrayal was not unheard of among the Sith. Ambition had always driven their order. Apprentices plotted against masters. Masters eliminated rivals. The struggle for power was constant. But if one of their own had begun secretly shaping the minds of others, that was something far more unsettling. Phobos felt the tension spreading through the academy halls. Fear had begun moving through the masters themselves now, and it was quieter than the fear of the apprentices, but it carried greater weight. Sith masters were trained to control their emotions carefully. When doubt appeared in their minds, it was rarely visible, but Phobos could feel it. She had spent months studying the fears of those around her. The masters were no different. Beneath their discipline, they carried the same hidden doubts as every other being in the galaxy. The question was simple. Who was responsible for the chaos growing inside the academy? Phobos knew the answer, and she knew the masters would eventually begin searching for it. The disappearances continued. Another promising apprentice failed during a duel and was removed from the academy soon afterward. A second student lost control during a training session and nearly injured his own master before being taken away by guards. Each event deepened the suspicion among the Sith. The masters began observing their students more closely. Phobos noticed the change immediately. Their attention lingered longer on every duel. Their presence in the training chambers became more frequent. They watched for signs of manipulation within the Force. But Phobos had already learned how to hide her influence. She never forced a mind to obey her commands. Instead, she opened the fears already buried inside them. To the masters, those fears appeared natural, and weakness was common among Sith apprentices. The masters had seen it many times before. Students who lacked discipline often collapsed under pressure. Phobos allowed them to believe that. One evening, the masters gathered in one of the deeper chambers of the academy to discuss the growing problem among their students. Phobos sensed their meeting through the Force as she walked alone through the silent corridors above. Their thoughts moved through the dark side like distant echoes. Concern, suspicion, anger. They believed a hidden enemy had begun manipulating their academy. What they did not yet realize was that the enemy was already among their students. Phobos paused near a stone window that overlooked the Valley of the Dark Lords. The tombs of ancient Sith stood beneath the night sky, their shadows stretching across the desert sands. The dark side moved quietly through the force around her. It felt stronger than ever before. Phobos understood something clearly now, that the Sith Masters would eventually discover that someone inside their academy was responsible for the chaos. And when that moment came, they would turn on each other. Because the Sith trusted no one. Not their rivals, not their students, not even themselves. Phobos looked out across the silent valley, feeling the fears of the academy drifting through the force toward her once again. The Masters believed they were searching for a hidden enemy. They were correct, and they simply did not know that the enemy was already standing within their walls, watching, waiting, and preparing for the moment when the Sith would finally turn against one of their own. The fear inside the academy had spread too far to ignore. For months, the Sith Masters on Korriban had watched their apprentices fail in ways that made no sense. Duels ended in hesitation. Skilled students collapsed under sudden doubt. Rivals who once seemed strong simply broke. At first, the Masters blamed weakness. Weakness was common among Sith students, but the pattern had continued. And now, the Masters could feel something else moving through the Force. The dark side inside the academy felt disturbed. The emotions of the apprentices were no longer chaotic in the usual way. Instead, they seemed guided, almost shaped by something unseen, a hidden influence. Within the Sith Order, such manipulation was dangerous, because it meant one thing. Another Sith had begun playing a deeper game. The Masters began to investigate quietly, and they watched their students more carefully during training. They studied every duel, searching for signs of unnatural influence within the Force. But the more they observed, the more unsettling the pattern became. The apprentices who failed often spoke of the same feeling, a presence in their thoughts, a moment when fear appeared suddenly, stronger than it should have been. Some described it as if someone had opened a door inside their mind and allowed their worst doubts to step forward. And at first, the Masters dismissed these claims as excuses, but eventually, they began to listen. Fear was not unusual among Sith apprentices, but fear that appeared suddenly, again and again, in different students, suggested something else. Someone inside the academy was manipulating the minds of others, and that someone had grown powerful. Phobos felt the shift immediately. As she moved through the corridors of the academy, she could sense the change in the Master's thoughts, and their emotions had become sharper. Suspicion moved through their minds like a quiet storm. They were searching. For the first time since she had begun shaping the fears of others, the Sith were beginning to look for the source. Phobos remained calm. She had already expected this moment. The Sith were ambitious, but they were also cautious. When something threatened their control, they did not ignore it for long. Eventually, they would begin hunting for whoever was responsible. And Phobos had already prepared herself for that possibility. Her influence within the academy remained hidden because she never forced control over another mind. She simply awakened fears that were already there. To the Masters, it appeared natural. Weak apprentices often collapsed under pressure, but suspicion had begun to grow. One evening, Phobos walked alone along the upper stone pathways of the academy. From there, she could see the desert valley stretching toward the ancient tombs of the Sith. And the sky above Korriban was darkening as night approached. Through the Force, she felt the thoughts of several Masters gathering within one of the deeper chambers below. They were speaking about the disturbances in the academy. Phobos listened quietly. Their conversation carried a single conclusion. Someone among their students had begun manipulating the minds of others through the dark side of the Force. That someone had to be found. And when they were discovered, the punishment would be absolute. Phobos stood silently at the edge of the stone walkway, looking out across the red desert beyond the academy walls. The winds of Korriban moved slowly through the Valley of Tombs. She understood something the Masters had not yet realized. Their investigation would eventually lead them to her. The Sith did not tolerate rivals who gained power in secret. When they finally recognized what she had become, now they would not try to control her. They would try to destroy her. Phobos did not fear that outcome, because she had already learned the most important lesson of the dark side. Fear was a weapon, and the Sith around her were already afraid. The suspicion of the Sith Masters soon turned into action. Inside the academy on Korriban, quiet investigations continued for several weeks. Masters observed their students more closely than ever before. Training exercises were carefully monitored. Even private duels were watched with growing interest. But the Sith Masters found nothing. No apprentice displayed obvious signs of controlling the minds of others. No ritual or forbidden teaching had been discovered within the academy halls. Yet the disturbances continued. Fear still appeared suddenly during combat. Rivalries still ended in strange and unexpected defeats. And the dark side itself still felt disturbed. For the Sith, such uncertainty was unacceptable. If the source of the chaos could not be found inside the academy, then the Masters would remove the entire threat. Their attention eventually turned toward one name: Phobos. She had remained quiet during the months of growing suspicion. Unlike many apprentices, she rarely competed openly for power. She did not challenge Masters directly. She did not boast about her strength. That silence itself became suspicious. The Sith valued ambition. To students who hid their power, often did so for dangerous reasons. Some Masters began to study her more carefully. What they saw troubled them. Whenever Phobos walked through the academy halls, the emotions of the other apprentices shifted slightly. Conversations grew tense. Some students avoided meeting her eyes. Others stepped aside as she passed. Fear followed her. The Masters could sense it through the Force, and at first they believed the other apprentices were simply intimidated by her growing reputation. But the feeling was deeper than that. Their students were not merely afraid of Phobos. They were afraid of something inside their own minds. That realization changed everything. The Masters did not need proof. Within Sith culture, suspicion alone was often enough to justify action. A secret council was held deep within the academy, and several of the most powerful Sith Masters gathered to discuss what must be done. Phobos was becoming too dangerous to ignore. If she truly possessed the ability to manipulate the fears of others, then she could one day turn the entire academy against them. That possibility could not be allowed. The decision was made quietly. Phobos would be eliminated. But the Sith Masters understood one important thing. If they attempted to confront her directly within the academy, then she might sense their intentions through the Force. Her connection to the emotions of others made her dangerous in ways they could not fully predict. They needed to destroy her quickly, and without warning. The opportunity came soon afterward. Phobos had been ordered to leave Korriban briefly as part of a routine mission. A small starship had been assigned to her, allowing her to travel beyond the planet's orbit. To Phobos, the mission appeared ordinary. As Sith apprentices were often sent away from the academy to prove their loyalty or complete small assignments across the galaxy. But this mission was different. High above the red deserts of Korriban, several Sith warships were already waiting in silence. Their commanders had been given clear instructions. When Phobos' ship entered low orbit above the planet, they would attack without hesitation. No warning. No chance to escape. The Sith Masters believed this plan would solve their problem. And once Phobos was destroyed in orbit, The disturbances inside the academy would end. The fear that had begun spreading through their students would fade. Their order would return to its normal balance. None of them considered another possibility. They believed they were preparing an execution. But far below them, inside the academy halls, Phobos had already begun to sense something strange moving through the force. The fear inside the masters had changed. It no longer carried only suspicion, and now it carried intention. And that intention was directed toward her. The starship rose slowly from the surface of Korriban. Below it, the endless desert stretched across the world of the Sith. Ancient tombs cast long shadows across the red sand. The academy itself appeared small from this height, its stone towers barely visible against the vast valley of the Dark Lords. Phobos stood alone inside the cockpit as the ship climbed toward orbit. The mission she had been given was simple. She should leave the planet, travel beyond the system, complete a task for the Masters. Nothing unusual. But something inside the Force felt different. For years, Phobos had listened to the fears of others. Their emotions had become familiar signals within the dark side. Every doubt, every hidden anxiety moved through the Force like distant echoes she could easily recognize. Now those echoes had changed. The fear she sensed did not come from apprentices. It came from the Masters. And their emotions moved through the Force from the surface of Korriban. Suspicion, anger, and beneath those feelings, something colder, resolve. Phobos closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the connection to deepen. The meaning became clear. They were afraid of her, and the Sith did not tolerate fear within their ranks. The ship continued rising into the crimson sky above the planet. Clouds of red dust drifted beneath the vessel as the stars slowly began to appear above. The darkness of space waited beyond the thin atmosphere. Phobos opened her eyes again. Through the Force, she felt another presence. Several of them. Cold minds, disciplined and silent, waiting somewhere beyond the upper atmosphere. Their fear was different from the others she had sensed before. It carried no confusion or hesitation, only purpose. Phobos understood immediately. The Masters had chosen their solution. They would not confront her. They would destroy her. The starship broke through the final layers of Korriban's atmosphere and entered the emptiness of space. For a moment, the stars seemed perfectly still around the vessel. Then the attack began. Red flashes of turbo laser fire erupted from the darkness ahead. Several Sith warships revealed themselves in orbit, their weapons already firing. Energy bolts tore through the black sky toward the small vessel. The first blast struck the starship's shields, sending violent shockwaves through the cockpit. Warning alarms filled the cabin. Phobos gripped the controls as the ship shook beneath the impact. Outside the window, the massive shapes of the warships plummeted slowly into view. They had been waiting. The Sith Masters had not intended to capture her. They had intended to erase her. Another volley of fire struck the vessel. The shields collapsed instantly. Explosions erupted across the outer hull as the starship struggled to maintain control. Systems began failing one by one. The engines flickered as the ship spun slightly in orbit. Phobos remained calm. Through the Force, she could feel the thoughts of the Sith commanders aboard the attacking warships. They believed the battle was already over. To them, the small vessel had no chance of escape. One final barrage of turbo laser fire erupted from the warships. The energy blasts struck the ship directly. The explosion shattered the vessel in orbit above Korriban, and fragments of burning metal scattering across the dark sky. From the surface of the planet, the explosion appeared as a brief flash of light above the red horizon. Inside the Sith Academy, the Masters felt the moment through the Force. The threat had been eliminated. Darth Phobos was dead. High above the planet, the wreckage of the destroyed starship drifted silently through space. Flames faded slowly as the fragments cooled in the vacuum. To the Sith, the problem had been solved. But the dark side of the Force carried a different truth. Because the presence they had tried to destroy had not disappeared. The Sith Masters felt the explosion through the Force. Inside the Academy halls on Korriban, several of them paused at the same moment. The destruction of the starship had sent a brief disturbance through the dark side, like a stone dropped into still water. Then the feeling faded. Silence returned. To the Masters, the meaning was clear. The threat had been eliminated. And for months, they had suspected that one of their own students had begun manipulating the fears of others. The disturbances inside the academy had grown too large to ignore. Apprentices had failed in strange ways. Rivalries had turned unpredictable. The balance of power within the academy had begun to shift. Now, it was over. Phobos had been destroyed in orbit above the planet. Without her influence, the Masters believed the academy would return to its normal state. Rivalries would continue, but they would unfold naturally again. The strange manipulation of fear would disappear. That was what the Masters expected. For a time, it seemed they were correct. The duels inside the academy resumed their usual patterns. Students fought with renewed focus. The sudden waves of hesitation and panic that had once disrupted combat began to fade. The Masters interpreted this as confirmation. Phobos had been responsible, and now she was gone. But the dark side of the Force did not share their certainty. Far beyond the academy walls, across the endless deserts of Korriban, the wind continued to move slowly through the Valley of the Dark Lords. The ancient tombs stood in silence beneath the stars. Those tombs had witnessed the rise and fall of countless Sith before. They had seen betrayal. They had seen ambition. And they had seen many Sith who refused to die quietly. The wreckage of the destroyed starship still drifted in orbit above the planet. Fragments of the vessel slowly scattered through space, cooling in the silent vacuum. To the commanders of the warships that had carried out the attack, the mission had been successful. Their sensors had detected no life signs after the explosion. The ship had been completely destroyed. But the dark side moved through the Force in ways that machines could not measure. And somewhere within that wreckage, a presence still remained. Phobos had sensed the betrayal before the attack began. The fear of the Sith Masters had reached her through the Force long before the first turbolaser fired. She had understood their intention, even as her starship rose through the crimson sky of Korriban. And when the warships revealed themselves in orbit, she had already begun to act, moments before the final barrage destroyed the vessel. And Phobos had reached into the Force with every ounce of power she possessed. The connection she had spent years building with the fears of others now served a new purpose. She disappeared, not through speed, not through escape, but through deception. Fragments of the destroyed starship scattered across space, burning briefly before fading into darkness. The warships that had carried out the attack detected nothing unusual within the debris field. To them, the outcome remained the same. Darth Phobos was dead. But far from the watching sensors of the Sith fleet, something moved silently through the wreckage. A single escape craft drifted slowly away from the scattered debris, its systems barely functioning after the violent explosion. Inside the small vessel, Phobos sat motionless. Her breathing was slow. Her eyes were closed. Through the Force, she could still feel the thoughts of the Sith Masters below on Korriban. They believed they had destroyed her. Yet Phobos opened her eyes slowly. For the first time since the attack began, a quiet understanding settled into her thoughts. The Sith had tried to erase her from their order, but in doing so, They had given her something far more valuable: freedom. The escape craft turned slowly in the darkness of space, leaving the orbit of Korriban behind. Below, the ancient world of the Sith grew smaller against the endless black sky. The Masters believed their nightmare had ended. But some nightmares do not die. They simply disappear into the dark and wait. The escape craft moved silently through deep space. Behind it, the red world of Korriban slowly disappeared into the distance. The tombs of the ancient Sith faded beneath the horizon of stars, leaving only darkness ahead. For the Masters of the Sith Academy, the story had ended. They believed the apprentice who had disturbed their order had been erased in orbit above the planet. The explosion of her starship had seemed final. Sensors detected no survivors, no escape craft, no signal. To them, Darth Phobos was dead, but the dark side carried a different truth. Inside the small vessel drifting through space, Phobos remained motionless for many hours after the attack. The strain of escaping the destruction had drained her strength. The connection she had used to conceal herself within the Force had demanded absolute control. But slowly, her mind recovered. The silence of space surrounded her. For the first time since her childhood within the Sith Academy, no rivals stood nearby. No masters watched her movements. No walls of ancient stone surrounded her thoughts. The Sith had tried to destroy her. Instead, they had freed her. Phobos opened her eyes and studied the starfield beyond the cockpit window. The galaxy stretched endlessly before her, filled with worlds far beyond the reach of the Academy on Korriban. For years she had studied the fears of those around her, and now she had something far more valuable: time. She turned the small vessel hour from the Korriban system, guiding it quietly into the deeper lanes of space. The ship was damaged from the explosion that had destroyed the larger starship, but it still carried enough power to travel. Phobos did not return to any Sith world. That would have been dangerous. The Masters who believed her dead would not hesitate to finish what they had started if they discovered the truth. A Sith did not forgive rivals who survived assassination. Instead, she disappeared. The galaxy was large enough to hide even a powerful Force user if they moved carefully. There were remote systems far from the reach of both the Sith and the Republic. Outer Rim colonies where travelers passed through without asking questions. Phobos chose those places. Years passed quietly. Across distant worlds, a quiet traveler appeared from time to time. Few who met her understood who she truly was. To most beings, she seemed calm and distant, a woman who preferred silence and observation. But the force around her continued to grow stronger. Phobos did not forget the lesson she had learned within the Sith Academy. Fear was everywhere. It existed on every world she visited. In crowded settlements where citizens feared poverty or violence. In remote outposts where travelers feared betrayal or abandonment. The galaxy was filled with minds carrying hidden doubts. Phobos listened to them all. Her connection to the dark side deepened with every passing year. The technique she had once used within the academy became sharper and more precise. She could reach into the thoughts of others without them ever realizing it. A merchant worried about losing their wealth. A soldier afraid of dying in battle. A traveler terrified of being alone. Fear surrounded her wherever she went. And slowly, Phobos began to shape it again. At first, the changes were small, and a fearful individual might suddenly gain the courage to follow her instructions. Someone who felt lost might discover a strange sense of purpose after speaking with her. Phobos did not present herself as a master. Not yet. But those who encountered her often left with the same strange feeling. They believed she understood their fears, and more importantly, they believed she could guide them through it. Over time, a quiet pattern began to form. Certain individuals who crossed paths with Phobos did not return to their old lives. Instead, they followed her. They listened to her words. They trusted her strange understanding of the darkness within their minds. They became loyal, completely loyal. Phobos had once been only a student inside the Sith Academy, but now she was something different. She had vanished from the Sith, and the galaxy had begun to forget her name. But in the silent corners of distant worlds, a new story was beginning to form. A story about a mysterious figure who could see the deepest fears of others. A figure who could turn those fears into devotion. And somewhere in the darkness of the galaxy, the first followers of the hidden fear had begun to appear. The first followers did not call themselves a cult. At the beginning, they were only individuals who had chosen to remain close to Darth Phobos after crossing her path somewhere in the galaxy. And each of them had once lived ordinary lives on distant worlds. Traders, travelers, wanderers. People who carried quiet fears they had never spoken about openly. Phobos had listened to those fears. And somehow, after speaking with her, their fear had changed. Some described the experience later as clarity. Others believed they had been chosen for something greater than their previous lives. But none of them fully understood what had truly happened inside their minds. And Phobos had simply opened the same doorway she had once discovered on Korriban. The doorway of fear. She did not force them to obey her. Instead, she revealed the doubts already living inside them, and then offered something they had never possessed before: purpose. Over time, those individuals began traveling with her between distant systems. They listened when she spoke about the nature of fear within the mind. They watched the quiet control she carried through the Force. To them, and her understanding of fear felt almost supernatural, and slowly the stories began to spread. In remote settlements across the Outer Rim, whispers began circulating about a mysterious figure who could see directly into the thoughts of others. Some said she could uncover a person's deepest terror with only a few words. Others claimed she could remove fear entirely, leaving behind an unshakable devotion. Most beings dismissed those rumors as exaggerations, but the whispers continued. How a traveler might arrive on a distant world and speak about a woman who understood the darkness inside every mind. Another might tell a story about someone who had abandoned their old life after meeting her. Each story was slightly different, but one detail remained the same. Those who followed her were completely loyal. Phobos did not encourage the rumors openly. In fact, she rarely spoke about herself at all. And her followers were the ones who carried the stories forward as they traveled between systems. They spoke about her calm presence, about the strange way she seemed to sense their fears before they even expressed them, about how those fears no longer controlled them once she revealed them. To the followers, this was not manipulation, it was guidance. But the dark side of the Force told a deeper truth. Phobos was not removing fear from their minds. She was reshaping it. And the fear her followers once carried had simply been redirected. Now it pointed toward a new source, the fear of losing her. As the group traveling with Phobos slowly grew, the devotion of those followers deepened. They began organizing their movements carefully, ensuring that her presence remained hidden from those who might recognize the danger she represented. The Sith still believed she had died in orbit above Korriban. That belief protected her. Meanwhile, and her influence continued to spread quietly across distant systems. A small gathering of followers would form on one world, then vanish months later as they traveled elsewhere. Sometimes they recruited others, Sometimes they simply observed the worlds around them, but always they returned to Phobos. Years passed this way, and during that time, a new name slowly began to appear within the whispers moving through the outer rim. And some who had heard the stories began referring to the mysterious leader by a different title. They called her the Hidden Fear. The name spread slowly through the voices of travelers and merchants who carried rumors from one system to another. Few understood where the title had come from, but those who followed Phobos knew exactly what it meant. She did not rule through strength. She ruled through the fears hidden inside every mind she touched. And somewhere far from the ancient tombs of Korriban, a quiet legend had begun to grow. The followers who gathered around Darth Phobos rarely met in large numbers. Phobos understood something important about power in the galaxy. Visibility attracted enemies. Both the Sith and the Jedi watched carefully for signs of new threats rising within the Force. If too many followers appeared in one place, attention would follow quickly. So Phobos chose a different path. And her followers moved quietly through the galaxy. Small groups traveled between distant systems, blending easily among traders, mercenaries, and travelers who passed constantly through the outer rim. They did not wear symbols or declare loyalty openly, but their devotion was absolute. Every decision they made was guided by the same purpose: serve the Hidden Fear. Many of these followers had once lived ordinary lives. Some had been soldiers who lost faith in the Republic, and others had been criminals hiding from justice. A few were wanderers searching for meaning in a galaxy that seemed too large and too cold. Phobos had found them all through the same method: fear. Every mind carried it. The fear of death, the fear of failure, the fear of being forgotten. Phobos listened to those fears and revealed them with quiet precision. When she spoke to someone, she did not threaten them or demand loyalty. Instead, she showed them the truth they had tried to hide from themselves. Once that truth appeared clearly before them, many chose to follow her. To those followers, Phobos seemed almost unstoppable. She always knew what they feared most. She always understood the hidden doubts they carried in silence. And when she spoke about those fears, the darkness inside their minds seemed to shift into something stronger: devotion. Over time, the followers began organizing themselves more carefully, and small cells formed on different worlds, each group remaining separate from the others to avoid drawing attention. They communicated through quiet signals and trusted couriers rather than open messages. The galaxy was large enough to hide them, but their purpose was not simply survival. Phobos had begun giving them instructions. Some followers traveled to worlds where Jedi were known to operate quietly. These agents observed the movements of the Jedi and reported what they saw, and others moved through systems where Sith influence remained strong. Those followers watched the Sith carefully. Phobos had not forgotten the betrayal above Korriban. The Sith believed she had died that day, but one day they would learn the truth. And when that moment came, Phobos intended to be ready. Her followers began training in secret. Some learned the use of weapons. Others studied the teachings of the dark side as Phobos explained them. She did not teach them everything she knew, but she shared enough to shape their understanding of fear and power. Unlike the Sith academies of Korriban, her followers were not encouraged to betray each other. Instead, they worked together. Their loyalty to Phobos was the center of their unity. That loyalty was not created through force. It grew from the same place all devotion begins: fear of losing what they believed had saved them. As the years passed, the network of followers continued spreading quietly across the outer rim, and a traveler who joined them might disappear from their old life forever. Months later, that same traveler could appear in another system, carrying the teachings of the hidden fear. Each new follower strengthened the growing network, and yet very few outside the group knew it existed. The Sith remained unaware. The Jedi sensed disturbances within the Force from time to time, but they could not trace those disturbances to a single source. Phobos preferred it that way. So from the shadows of the galaxy, she continued building something far more powerful than the Sith Masters had ever imagined. Not an army, something far more dangerous. Belief. For many years, the movement around Darth Phobos remained almost invisible. Travelers spoke quietly about a mysterious teacher who understood fear. Small groups gathered in distant systems, then disappeared again before anyone asked questions. Merchants carried rumors from one world to another, but those rumors rarely reached the powerful institutions that controlled the galaxy. Phobos preferred it that way. The Sith believed she had died in orbit above Korriban. The Jedi had never truly known her name. As long as those two orders remained unaware of her survival, she could continue shaping the network that had begun to grow around her. And slowly, that network began to change. At first, her followers had simply traveled beside her, and they listened to her teachings about fear and the nature of the dark side. They watched the calm certainty with which she moved through the galaxy. But devotion has a way of evolving. The followers no longer saw Phobos as only a guide. To many of them, she had become something greater. They began speaking about her with reverence. A few started describing her as a figure chosen by the dark side itself. Others believed she possessed knowledge the Sith had forgotten long ago. And some even claimed she could see the future through the fears hidden inside every mind she touched. Phobos did not correct them. She understood how belief worked. Fear was powerful, but belief was even stronger. When fear and belief combined inside the same mind, loyalty became unbreakable. Over time, the followers began organizing their gatherings more carefully. What had once been small meetings between travelers slowly became something more structured. On certain remote worlds, so groups of followers gathered in secret chambers or abandoned outposts far from the eyes of local authorities. There they spoke openly about the hidden fear. They shared stories about the way Phobos had revealed their deepest doubts and turned those fears into strength. Each story deepened the devotion of those who listened. To outsiders, these gatherings would have looked strange, but to the followers, they felt sacred, and they believed they had discovered a truth that the rest of the galaxy refused to see. Fear ruled every mind, and only Phobos truly understood it. The gatherings continued growing over the years. Small cells formed across distant systems, each group connected by the same quiet belief. Some followers became recruiters, searching for individuals whose fears made them vulnerable to the teachings of the hidden fear. Others acted as guardians, protecting the secrecy of the movement. But every group remained loyal to a single figure. Phobos never declared herself a ruler. She never demanded worship. Yet the devotion of her followers deepened anyway. Eventually, the name they used for themselves became clear. They called themselves the Cult of Darth Phobos. The title spread quietly through their hidden gatherings. Each follower accepted it without hesitation. To them, the name did not represent simple loyalty. It represented purpose. And Phobos had once been a forgotten apprentice within the Sith Academy of Korriban. The Sith Masters who betrayed her had believed that destroying her ship would erase the threat she represented. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous. From the silence of the Outer Rim, Phobos had built a network that now stretched across many worlds. Her followers did not seek glory. They did not seek power in the open. They waited, and through the Force, Phobos could feel their loyalty moving across the galaxy like distant echoes. Each mind carried the same emotion: devotion born from fear. The Sith believed their enemy had died in fire above Korriban, but far beyond their reach, the hidden fear had returned. And now, she was no longer alone. The cult did not remain silent forever. For many years, the followers of Darth Phobos had moved quietly through the distant edges of the galaxy. They traveled between systems without drawing attention, gathering new believers and strengthening the secret network that had begun forming around the hidden fear. But devotion eventually demands action. The followers no longer wished to remain observers, and they believed Phobos had revealed a truth the galaxy refused to understand. Fear ruled every mind. It ruled the Republic, the Jedi, and even the Sith who claimed to master the dark side. To the followers, the galaxy needed to be shown that truth, and Phobos understood exactly how to begin. She did not command armies. She did not conquer planets. Instead, she chose something far quieter: assassination. The first killing happened on a distant Outer Rim world, where a small Republic outpost had stood for many years. The settlement was peaceful, protected only by a few security officers and a visiting Jedi Knight who had been sent to monitor local disturbances in the Force. The Jedi had sensed something unusual in the region, but he did not understand its source. Late one evening, as the settlement slept beneath a pale sky, several figures moved through the shadows of the outpost. And they wore no armor, they carried no banners, but they carried the teachings of Phobos. The followers had spent months studying the Jedi who protected the settlement. They had learned his routines, his habits, and the moments when he allowed his guard to fall. They understood something most assassins did not. Fear weakens even the strongest mind. When the attack finally came, it happened quickly. The Jedi sensed danger only seconds before the strike. A sudden ripple in the Force reached his thoughts as the assassins emerged from the darkness around him. But the fear had already begun spreading through his mind. The followers of Phobos did not rely only on weapons. Before the attack began, they had reached into the Force together, focusing on the same fear hidden inside the Jedi's thoughts. The fear of failing the people he had sworn to protect. That fear fractured his concentration. For a moment, his connection to the Force wavered. The assassins struck. The duel was brief. When the settlement awoke the next morning, the Jedi Knight who had protected them was gone. His body was found in the outskirts of the outpost, his lightsaber lying beside him in the sand. The attackers had already disappeared. The Republic authorities blamed the killing on unknown raiders, but the truth moved quietly through the Force. Far from the outpost, Phobos felt the moment of death like a faint echo across the galaxy. The first strike had succeeded. Her followers had proven they could act without revealing themselves. That was only the beginning. More assassins soon followed. Small groups of cult members traveled through the Outer Rim, observing Jedi patrols and Sith agents who operated in secret across distant systems. They studied their targets patiently, waiting for the moment when fear could be turned against them. The attacks were never large. Often only one or two assassins appeared, but their precision made them terrifying. A Jedi envoy might vanish while traveling between worlds. A Sith messenger could disappear inside a quiet starport. No witnesses, no explanation, only silence. The galaxy began noticing the pattern slowly. Something was hunting powerful Force users, and no one knew where the threat was coming from. The first death did not attract much attention. Across the galaxy, a single fallen Jedi Knight could easily be explained away. The Outer Rim was dangerous, and raiders attacked remote settlements often. Smugglers, mercenaries, and criminals moved through those distant systems without ever appearing in Republic records. But then another death followed, and then another. The pattern began forming slowly, almost too quietly for anyone to notice at first. A Jedi envoy, traveling alone between worlds, disappeared near the edge of the Mid-Rim. Weeks later, a Republic patrol discovered the wreckage of his shuttle drifting in space, and there were no signs of a battle, only silence. On another world, a Force-sensitive messenger who served the Sith failed to arrive at his destination. His ship was later found abandoned on a lonely landing platform, the engines still warm as if the pilot had vanished moments before. Stories like this began appearing across distant sectors. The Jedi noticed first. Within the Order, unusual deaths were always studied carefully, and the Jedi understood that threats to Force users often carried deeper meaning. When one knight fell in battle, it was tragic. But when several vanished across different systems within the same period, it suggested something darker. The Jedi Council quietly began investigating. Reports arrived from distant outposts. Some described brief encounters with unknown attackers who appeared from the shadows and vanished just as quickly. And others spoke about strange disturbances in the Force moments before a Jedi disappeared. Fear was always present in those reports. The victims had sensed it, but they had sensed it too late. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the followers of Darth Phobos continued moving quietly between systems. They traveled in small groups, or sometimes alone. Each assassin had been trained to observe their targets patiently. They did not rush their missions. Phobos had taught them something important. Fear weakens the mind long before a weapon is drawn. Many of the assassinations began the same way. The followers would spend days studying their target from a distance. They learned the habits of the Jedi or Sith they intended to strike. They waited until the moment when their victim was alone. Then they reached into the Force. Phobos had trained them to sense the hidden fears inside their target's thoughts. Those fears were different for every being. Some Jedi feared failing their duty, and others feared losing control of their connection to the Force. Even Sith carried fears buried beneath their anger. When the assassins touched those fears through the dark side, the results were immediate. Doubt entered the mind, concentration fractured. The connection to the Force weakened. That was when the attack came. The assassins rarely stayed long after their mission was complete. They disappeared into the shadows of the galaxy just as quietly as they had arrived. To the outside world, the attacks appeared random, but they were not. Phobos had chosen every target carefully. Each fallen Jedi weakened the influence of the Order in distant systems. Each missing Sith agent disrupted the secret networks the Sith used to maintain their control across the galaxy. The balance between the two orders slowly began to shift, but neither the Jedi nor the Sith understood what was truly happening. They believed they were facing scattered assassins or unknown enemies, and they did not yet realize the truth. All of these attacks were connected. They were being guided by a single mind. Far from the worlds where the assassinations took place, Phobos continued watching the galaxy through the thoughts of her followers. Each death echoed faintly through the dark side, and with every echo, the legend of the hidden fear grew stronger. The Jedi were the first to recognize the danger. For many years, the Order had protected distant systems across the Republic, so Jedi Knights traveled between worlds, resolving conflicts, studying disturbances in the Force, and guiding those who sought their help. But suddenly, those journeys became more dangerous. Reports began arriving from multiple sectors of the Republic. A Jedi investigator who had been sent to resolve a dispute on a remote colony vanished without explanation. Weeks later, another Jedi envoy failed to return from a diplomatic mission. Then a third. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Within the Jedi archives, Records were carefully examined. The Order had faced many enemies throughout its long history. Sith lords, criminal syndicates, warlords, and hidden cults had all attempted to challenge the influence of the Jedi. But the attacks now spreading through the galaxy were different. They were precise. Each Jedi who fell had been alone when the attack occurred. There were no large battles, no armies, no clear enemy, only silence. The Jedi Council began assigning additional knights to investigate these disappearances. Some traveled to the locations where the victims had last been seen. Others followed the faint disturbances in the Force left behind after each death. But every investigation ended the same way. The trail vanished. The attackers never stayed long enough to be discovered. And yet, through the Force, the Jedi sensed something troubling: fear. Moments before their deaths, the fallen Jedi had experienced sudden waves of doubt and unease. Some had felt their connection to the Force weaken unexpectedly, as if something had reached into their thoughts and disrupted their concentration. To the Jedi, this suggested a disturbing possibility. A dark side presence was hunting them, but the Order could not identify its source. Meanwhile, far beyond the Jedi temples of the Republic, the followers of Darth Phobos continued their work. Phobos had studied the Jedi carefully during her years within the Sith Academy on Korriban. She understood their discipline. She understood their devotion to balance and self-control, but she also understood their weakness. The Jedi feared failure more than death. Their entire identity depended on protecting others and maintaining harmony within the Force. When doubt entered their minds, it could disrupt their focus in powerful ways. Phobos taught her followers to use that weakness. And before each assassination, the cultists reached through the Force toward the fears hidden within their target. The connection did not last long. It did not need to. Even a brief moment of doubt could fracture a Jedi's concentration during combat. And that moment was enough. One Jedi Knight encountered the assassins on a remote desert world while investigating reports of dark side activity. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, several figures emerged from the shadows of the rocky cliffs around him. The Jedi sensed danger instantly. He ignited his lightsaber and reached into the Force for guidance. But something was wrong. A sudden wave of fear appeared in his mind, sharp and unfamiliar. Memories of past failures surfaced without warning. The faces of people he had been unable to save appeared in his thoughts. His focus wavered. The assassins moved quickly. The duel lasted only seconds. When it ended, the Jedi lay motionless on the desert sand, his lightsaber extinguished beside him. The assassins vanished into the darkness soon afterward. To the Jedi Order, these deaths were tragic mysteries. But to Phobos, they were something else. Proof. Proof that fear could defeat even the most disciplined guardians of the light. And as more Jedi began to fall across the galaxy, the Order slowly realized something terrifying. They were being hunted. The Jedi were not the only ones who began to notice the killings. Across distant systems where the influence of the Sith still reached, strange reports began appearing within their hidden networks as well. Messengers who carried information between Sith enclaves failed to arrive. Agents sent to observe Republic activity disappeared without explanation. At first, the Sith believed these losses were accidents. The galaxy was always dangerous. Rival factions fought constantly for control of territory and resources. Smugglers, pirates, and mercenaries could easily ambush a lone traveler moving between worlds. But the patterns soon became too clear. The victims were not random. Many of them had been Force-sensitive agents working quietly on behalf of the Sith. Some had been students traveling between academies. Others were minor envoys trusted to carry messages between powerful masters. one by one, they vanished. Yet the Sith investigated with the same ruthless logic they applied to every threat. Someone was targeting their people, but the identity of the attacker remained hidden. Unlike the Jedi, the Sith did not fear conflict. Many masters believed the deaths were the result of rivalry within their own ranks. Betrayal was common among Sith followers, and assassinations between rivals happened often. Yet the disturbances in the Force surrounding these deaths felt unusual. Fear appeared before each killing. That detail troubled the Sith masters. Fear was a tool they used against others, not a weapon that could easily be turned against them. Most Sith believed their connection to the dark side made them resistant to such weaknesses, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Even Sith could hesitate when doubt entered their minds. Meanwhile, far from the academies and strongholds of the Sith, the followers of Darth Phobos continued expanding their operations across the galaxy. So the cult had grown larger over the years. Small groups of followers moved through distant systems, sharing information and preparing their strikes carefully. Some missions targeted Jedi, others targeted Sith. To Phobos, the difference between them did not matter. Both orders claimed mastery over the Force, and both believed they understood the true nature of power. Phobos intended to prove them wrong. Through the dark side, she could feel the echoes of every assassination carried out by her followers. Each death created a brief ripple through the Force, like a distant tremor spreading across the galaxy. Those ripples carried fear with them. The Jedi felt it. The Sith felt it. Neither side could see the source. But both sides understood something terrible was happening. The galaxy had always been dangerous for Force users. Battles between Jedi and Sith had shaped countless wars throughout history. But those conflicts were usually open. This was different. Someone was hunting them from the shadows. Someone who understood their fears better than they understood themselves. In hidden chambers within Sith strongholds, masters began discussing the situation with growing concern. If a new enemy had begun targeting Force users across the galaxy, that enemy would eventually become a threat to them as well. The Sith prepared for retaliation, but they had no target to strike. They did not know where their enemy lived. They did not know who commanded the assassins. And they did not know that the very fear spreading through their ranks was part of the plan. Phobos had once been an apprentice inside the Sith Academy of Korriban. The masters who betrayed her had believed they understood power. Now the galaxy was beginning to learn a different truth. Fear could reach everywhere, and the hidden fear was already closer than anyone realized. Across the galaxy, fear was no longer a rumor. For many years, the Jedi and the Sith had believed the strange assassinations were isolated events. A fallen knight here, a missing Sith envoy there. The galaxy was vast, and violence was common. But eventually, even the most disciplined minds could no longer ignore the pattern. Jedi investigators had begun quietly comparing records from distant systems, and Sith agents had been doing the same within their hidden networks. And slowly, the same truth appeared before both orders. Someone was hunting them. The victims were not random travelers or soldiers. They were Force users, Jedi Knights, Sith messengers, apprentices and agents who carried the influence of their respective orders across the galaxy. And every death carried the same shadow within the Force: fear. Within the halls of the Jedi Order, concern grew steadily. And the Jedi had always believed that the dark side thrived on chaos and open conflict. But this enemy did not behave like a Sith army or a warlord seeking territory. This enemy moved in silence. No declarations, no armies, only sudden death. Several Jedi masters began speaking about the threat with increasing urgency. If the assassinations continued, the Order would slowly lose many of its members without ever facing the enemy directly. And even more troubling was the way the attacks unfolded. The fallen Jedi had sensed fear moments before their deaths. Not ordinary fear, something deeper, something that seemed to reach into their thoughts and weaken their connection to the Force itself. Meanwhile, in the hidden enclaves where the Sith gathered, similar discussions were taking place. The Sith rarely admitted weakness, but they were not blind. Their own agents had disappeared under the same mysterious circumstances. Some had been powerful Force users trained in the dark side. Others had been trusted messengers carrying important knowledge between Sith masters. If an unknown enemy could eliminate them so easily, the Sith had reason to be cautious. Through their spies and informants, fragments of information slowly began spreading between the two rival orders. Neither side trusted the other, yet the evidence pointed toward the same conclusion. The assassinations were connected. At the center of those whispers was a name many Sith had once believed belonged to a ghost, Darth Phobos. Among the Sith, the name had once been spoken with anger and resentment. Phobos had been an ambitious apprentice who turned on her rivals and slaughtered many within the Order before vanishing in orbit above Korriban. The Sith had believed she died when her ship was destroyed. But now the pattern of fear surrounding these assassinations reminded some masters of the rumors that followed her disappearance. Rumors about a Sith who could weaponize fear itself. Rumors about a hidden cult that obeyed her commands. For the Jedi, the name was far less familiar. Most within the Order had never heard it before. But when the Jedi investigators compared their findings with scattered Sith intelligence gathered through spies and informants, the same possibility emerged. The hidden fear might still be alive. If that possibility were true, the threat was unlike anything either Order had faced before. Phobos did not attack openly, so she eroded both sides from the shadows. If her followers continued eliminating Jedi and Sith one by one, the balance of power across the galaxy would slowly collapse, and neither Order could stop it alone. The realization came quietly, but when it arrived, it carried a terrible weight. For perhaps the first time in centuries, Jedi and Sith were facing the same enemy. The idea was almost impossible to accept. For thousands of years, the Jedi and the Sith had stood as sworn enemies, and their conflict had shaped entire eras of galactic history. Wars had been fought. Civilizations had risen and fallen under the shadow of their struggle. The Jedi believed the Sith represented corruption and destruction. The Sith believed the Jedi were weak guardians who suppressed true power. Between them, peace had never lasted long. And yet, the threat now spreading through the galaxy forced both sides to reconsider something they had never imagined. Neither Order could defeat this enemy alone, and the assassinations continued quietly. Jedi investigators vanished during missions meant to uncover the truth. Sith agents disappeared while attempting to trace the hidden cult rumored to be responsible. Each death carried the same signature within the Force: fear. That detail disturbed both orders deeply. Fear was supposed to be a weapon used by the Sith against their enemies. The Jedi were trained to confront fear and overcome it through discipline. But this new enemy seemed to understand fear on a deeper level. Whoever commanded the assassins knew how to reach into the thoughts of even experienced Force users and weaken them before a battle even began. That level of understanding was rare. Very few individuals in the history of the Sith had ever demonstrated such mastery. Among those few was a name that continued to surface during quiet discussions between investigators: Darth Phobos. The Sith had once believed her dead, but if the rumors surrounding the assassinations were true, then Phobos had not simply survived the destruction of her ship above Korriban. She had spent years building something in the shadows, something powerful enough to challenge both Jedi and Sith alike. That realization forced both orders to consider a solution that had never existed before: communication. At first, the contact between them happened indirectly, and informants carried fragments of information across neutral systems, where neither side openly controlled the territory. Agents from both orders listened carefully to those reports. Each side hoped to confirm the same terrifying possibility. Phobos had returned. Eventually, quiet meetings began taking place in isolated locations far from the eyes of the Republic or the Sith academies. Small groups of representatives from both orders arrived cautiously, each aware that centuries of hatred stood between them. Lightsabers remained close at hand. Trust was non-existent. But the information they carried forced them to remain in the same room. Jedi investigators shared the patterns they had discovered in the deaths of their knights. Sith agents revealed similar reports from their own networks. The evidence aligned too clearly to ignore. The same methods, the same disturbances in the Force, the same spreading fear. Slowly, and the truth became impossible to deny. A hidden enemy had spent years weakening both orders. And if that enemy continued operating in secret, neither the Jedi nor the Sith would remain strong enough to defend themselves when the final strike came. The agreement that followed was fragile. It was not a peace treaty. It was not forgiveness. It was a temporary necessity. For a brief moment in galactic history, two ancient enemies would cooperate. Their goal was simple: find the hidden fear and destroy her before the darkness she commanded consumed them both. The hunt began slowly. Neither the Jedi nor the Sith trusted the other enough to share everything they knew. Even in the fragile alliance that had formed, centuries of rivalry still lingered in every conversation and every strategy, yet both sides understood the same truth. If Darth Phobos continued operating in the shadows, the assassinations would never stop. So the search for the hidden fear spread across the galaxy. So Jedi investigators began tracing every known disturbance connected to the earlier killings. They examined reports from remote outposts, starports, and settlements where Force-sensitive individuals had disappeared. At the same time, Sith agents activated their own network of spies. Unlike the Jedi, the Sith had long relied on hidden informants scattered across criminal syndicates, mercenary guilds, and independent systems far from Republic authority. So those informants were now ordered to watch for any sign of unusual gatherings or secret movements among Force-sensitive cults. The galaxy was vast. Finding Phobos would not be easy. But slowly, small fragments of information began to surface. Several witnesses across distant systems described encounters with unusual groups of travelers. These travelers often moved quietly between worlds and avoided drawing attention. They did not wear the robes of Jedi or the armor of Sith warriors. But something about them felt different. Those who had spoken with them sometimes reported strange conversations about fear and power. Others described the travelers as deeply loyal to an unseen leader whose name they refused to reveal. To the Jedi and the Sith, these descriptions sounded familiar. They matched the rumors surrounding the secret cult that had been whispered about for years. The cult of Phobos. The investigators followed these fragments carefully. So each new report helped them map the movements of the mysterious followers across multiple systems. The pattern revealed something important. The cult did not operate from a single world. Its members moved constantly through the outer rim and distant regions of the galaxy, spreading their influence quietly while avoiding attention from both major orders. That made the hunt far more difficult, but it also confirmed that the threat was real. Phobos had not simply survived the destruction of her ship above Korriban. She had spent years building a network capable of reaching almost anywhere in the galaxy. Eventually, one particular lead caught the attention of both Jedi and Sith investigators. On a distant world near the edge of the Mid-Rim, several witnesses had reported seeing a gathering of individuals who spoke openly about the teachings of the hidden fear. And the gathering had taken place inside an abandoned structure far from the nearest settlement. By the time authorities arrived, the building was empty, but the traces left behind were unmistakable. Through the Force, the investigators sensed the same dark signature that had appeared before many of the assassinations: fear. The evidence suggested something important. The cult was growing confident. After years of hiding in small groups, its followers had begun meeting in larger gatherings. Now, that confidence created opportunity. For the first time since the assassinations began, the Jedi and the Sith believed they might finally be close to discovering the location of their enemy. A plan began forming quietly among the investigators. If they could track the movements of the cult members carefully enough, those followers might eventually lead them to their master. The hidden fear had spent years hiding from the galaxy. Now the galaxy was hunting her. The plan required patience. And for many years, Darth Phobos had remained hidden, while her followers moved across the galaxy, carrying out her will. The Jedi and the Sith both understood that finding her directly would be almost impossible. But her cult was different. The followers were loyal, and loyalty created patterns. So the investigators from both orders focused their attention on the movements of the cult itself. Every sighting of a follower was recorded carefully, and every rumor about gatherings or strange travelers was examined. Slowly, those scattered reports began forming a map. The cult did not operate randomly. Certain worlds appeared again and again in the records. Remote systems where Republic authority was weak. Isolated settlements where travelers could arrive and depart without drawing attention. Places where the shadows were deep enough to hide an entire movement. Jedi investigators observed these locations from a distance and studying the behavior of suspected cult members. Sith agents followed the same targets through criminal networks and hidden trade routes. For the first time, the two ancient enemies were hunting together. The cooperation remained tense. Jedi Knights watched their Sith counterparts carefully, knowing how easily betrayal could emerge from the dark side. Sith agents regarded the Jedi with equal suspicion. She convinced that the Order of the Light would eventually try to turn the situation to their advantage. But neither side acted against the other. The threat they faced was too dangerous. Over time, their observations revealed something important about the cult. The followers did not simply travel randomly between worlds. They were gathering. Small groups that once operated independently were beginning to move toward the same region of space. Ships carrying suspected cultists were seen entering the same distant sector along the edge of the outer rim. To the investigators, the meaning was clear. Something important was happening. The cult was preparing for a major gathering. That gathering could finally reveal the location of their leader. The Jedi and the Sith understood the opportunity immediately. If they allowed the cult to assemble without interference, the hidden fear herself might appear among her followers. And if that happened, the trap could finally close. Plans were made carefully. Joint teams of Jedi and Sith prepared to move toward the region where the cult activity had been detected. The operation would remain secret until the last possible moment. If Phobos learned that she was being hunted, she would vanish again into the shadows of the galaxy. That could not be allowed. The investigators continued watching as more ships quietly entered the remote sector. Each arrival confirmed their suspicions. The cult was gathering its strength. Far away from the worlds where the Jedi and Sith prepared their operation, Phobos could feel the presence of her followers through the dark side of the Force. Their loyalty echoed through her thoughts like distant whispers. The time she had been preparing for was approaching. But while her followers gathered in devotion, another force was moving toward them through the stars. The Jedi and the Sith had begun their hunt, and the hidden fear was no longer alone in the darkness. The gathering began in silence. For many years, the followers of Darth Phobos had moved across the galaxy in small, scattered groups. They traveled quietly between distant systems, spreading the teachings of the hidden fear while avoiding the attention of both the Jedi and the Sith. But now, something had changed. Ships arrived one by one at a forgotten world along the edge of the Outer Rim. The planet itself held little value to the Republic or the Sith. It was barren in many places, its surface scarred by old storms and rocky wastelands. That made it perfect for secrecy. The ships landed far from one another, each touching down in isolated valleys or empty plains where no settlements existed. From those vessels emerged small groups of travelers dressed in dark robes. They did not greet each other loudly. They did not celebrate their arrival. Instead, they walked quietly toward the same destination. An ancient structure stood in the center of a deep canyon, carved into the planet's surface. Long ago, the building had served as a fortress for a forgotten warlord. Time had reduced its outer walls to cracked stone and dust. But deep inside the canyon, the structure still stood. That was where the followers gathered. One by one, the cultists entered the ruined fortress and filled the large central chamber hidden within its walls. Some had traveled across dozens of star systems to reach this place. Others had spent years working quietly within the cult before finally receiving the message that summoned them here. None of them questioned the call. They had been summoned by the hidden fear. Through the dark side of the Force, Phobos could feel every mind entering the chamber. Each new arrival strengthened the quiet presence spreading through the ancient building. Devotion. And the cult had grown larger than even the Jedi and the Sith realized. Dozens of followers now stood within the chamber, their thoughts focused on the same presence they felt approaching. Fear did not trouble them. Fear united them. At the far end of the chamber, a narrow corridor led deeper into the fortress. Torches burned along the walls, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Then the corridor darkened. A figure emerged slowly from the shadows. The followers lowered their heads as she approached. Darth Phobos walked calmly into the chamber, her green skin illuminated by the dim firelight. Blue hair framed her face, and her yellow eyes glowed faintly with the power of the dark side. For many of the cultists, this was the first time they had seen her in person. But none of them felt surprise. They felt something deeper, reverence. Phobos looked across the chamber silently, studying the minds of those who had gathered in her name. Through the Force, she could sense their fears and doubts, their loyalty and devotion. Every mind belonged to her. The gathering had taken many years to prepare. Soon, the cult would move beyond secrecy. But far above the planet's surface, hidden among the stars, another group of ships had already arrived. The hunters had followed the trail, and the final confrontation was about to begin. Far above the barren world, several ships waited in silence among the stars. They had arrived carefully, entering the system one at a time to avoid drawing attention. Their engines were quiet, their signals hidden. From a distance, they looked like ordinary vessels drifting through empty space. But the people inside those ships were anything but ordinary. Jedi Knights stood beside Sith warriors. For centuries, the two orders had fought each other across the galaxy. Their lightsabers had clashed on countless battlefields. Their philosophies had shaped wars that lasted generations. Yet now they stood together inside the same ships, watching the same planet below. The temporary alliance had brought them here. Investigators from both sides had followed the movements of the cult for months. Slowly, the trail of sightings and rumors had led them to this remote system on the edge of the outer rim. The cult had gathered here. That meant the hidden fear was close. Inside the command chamber of the largest vessel, and several figures studied the surface of the world, displayed on a holographic map. Jedi Masters observed the shifting energy patterns within the Force, searching for disturbances that might reveal the location of their enemy. Beside them stood Sith warriors who had spent their lives mastering the dark side. Their presence filled the room with tension. Neither side trusted the other, but the Force told them something important. The darkness below was real, even from orbit, as the Jedi could sense the disturbance spreading through the planet's surface like a storm beneath the ground. The Sith felt it as well, though they described the sensation differently. To them, it felt like a growing hunger. Both interpretations pointed to the same truth. Darth Phobos was on that world, and she was not alone. The investigators had already detected the presence of many Force-sensitive minds gathered in the same region of the planet, and the cult had assembled inside a canyon far from any settlements, exactly as the reports had predicted. The decision was made quickly. They could not allow the cult to scatter again. If Phobos escaped now, she would disappear into the shadows of the galaxy, just as she had years before. This time, the trap had to close. Shuttles were prepared within the hangars of the waiting ships. Jedi Knights and Sith warriors boarded the vessels together, their movements quiet and focused, and lightsabers hung at their belts. For many of them, this would be the first time fighting alongside their ancient enemies. No one spoke about that fact. The mission mattered more than pride. Soon, the shuttles descended through the atmosphere of the barren world. Clouds of dust swirled across the rocky surface as the vessels approached the canyon where the cult had gathered. Through the Force, the Jedi felt the presence of fear spreading across the land below. The Sith felt it as well. But they did not realize something important. The fear did not come from the cult alone. It came from their leader. Deep within the ruined fortress, Phobos had already sensed the arrival of the hunters, and she was waiting. Inside the ruined fortress, silence filled the chamber. The followers of Darth Phobos stood motionless around the dark stone walls, their minds focused on the presence of the woman who had brought them together. For many years, they had served her from the shadows, carrying out her will across the galaxy. Now they could feel something changing in the Force. A disturbance had entered the system. Phobos felt it clearly. Far above the planet, ships had arrived. Through the dark side, she sensed the minds within those vessels. Calm, disciplined thoughts shaped by Jedi training, and colder minds hardened by the teachings of the Sith. Both had come. Phobos closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the emotions surrounding those arrivals to flow through her awareness. Fear, determination, anger, doubt. Every thought moved through the Force like quiet echoes. The hunters had finally found her. For a brief moment, the chamber remained silent as the cultists waited for their master to speak. Then Phobos stepped forward slowly. Her yellow eyes moved across the gathered followers, reading their thoughts easily. Some felt excitement at the approaching conflict. Others felt uncertainty. Even devotion could carry fear when battle approached. But Phobos did not feel concern. She felt opportunity. For years she had studied the minds of Jedi and Sith alike. Their strengths were different, but their weaknesses were often the same. Both believed they could control fear through discipline or anger. Phobos knew that belief was an illusion. Fear lived inside every mind, and she knew exactly how to awaken it. Through the Force, she reached outward beyond the fortress walls. Her thoughts moved across the canyon, and rising into the sky where the approaching shuttles descended toward the surface. Inside those vessels, Jedi and Sith warriors prepared themselves for battle. Then the first whisper of fear touched their thoughts. It arrived quietly. A memory surfaced in one Jedi's mind, an old failure from years earlier, when he had been unable to save a group of civilians during a distant conflict. Another warrior felt doubt creeping into his concentration, had his connection to the Force flickering for just a moment. Even the Sith felt it. Anger had always fueled their power, but anger could not fully hide the deeper fears buried beneath it. Some remembered betrayals from their own masters. Others felt the sudden awareness that they were descending toward an enemy unlike any they had faced before. The effect spread slowly. Phobos stood at the center of the chamber, her mind reaching outward through the dark side as the canyon walls trembled faintly with the distant sound of approaching engines. Around her, the cultists watched in silence. They could not see the hunters yet, but they could feel the growing tension in the Force. Phobos opened her eyes. The Jedi and the Sith had come to destroy the hidden fear. But before their lightsabers ever ignited, their minds were already under attack. The shuttles landed in the canyon with thunderous force. Dust and loose stone scattered across the barren ground as their engines powered down. From the open ramps, warriors stepped into the dim light of the canyon floor. Jedi Knights moved first, their robes shifting gently in the wind that moved through the cliffs. Beside them came the warriors of the Sith, their presence colder, sharper, like blades hidden beneath dark cloth. For a brief moment, neither side looked at the other, so their attention remained fixed on the ancient fortress carved into the canyon walls. Inside that ruin waited the enemy who had hunted them for years. The doors of the fortress opened slowly, the followers of Darth Phobos. The battle ended, but the silence that followed did not feel like peace. The body of Darth Phobos lay still within the canyon, where Jedi and Sith warriors had finally ended the reign of the hidden fear. The dust slowly settled across the broken ground, and the echoes of battle faded into the quiet wind moving through the cliffs. For a moment, both sides simply stood there. Jedi Knights deactivated their lightsabers one by one. His Sith warriors lowered their blades as well, their crimson light disappearing into darkness. The alliance that had brought them together was already beginning to dissolve. Neither order trusted the other enough to remain longer than necessary. Yet something about the moment felt unsettling. Through the Force, the Jedi expected to feel a sense of balance returning. When a powerful servant of the dark side died, the disturbance they created within the Force usually faded quickly. But this time, the darkness did not vanish completely. Instead, it lingered faintly, like the echo of a nightmare that had not fully ended. The Jedi investigators noticed it first. Some of them exchanged quiet looks as they felt the strange ripple moving through the Force. The Sith sensed it as well, though they interpreted the feeling differently. To them, it felt like a shadow refusing to disappear. Eventually, the warriors departed the canyon, leaving the ruined fortress and the fallen cult behind. The mission had been successful. The hidden fear was gone, or so they believed. Yet in the months that followed, strange rumors began appearing across distant systems. Travelers whispered about the cult that had once followed Phobos. Some claimed a few of her followers had escaped the final battle. Others believed the cult had already spread too far to be destroyed completely. The stories traveled quietly between starports, settlements, and distant outposts where news moved slowly. And each story carried the same unsettling question. If Phobos had truly died in that canyon, why did the darkness she created still feel alive in the Force? Years passed after the fall of Darth Phobos. The battle in the canyon slowly faded into history, recorded in scattered reports and quiet discussions among the Jedi and the Sith who had survived it. The temporary alliance that destroyed the hidden fear ended soon after the conflict. The Jedi returned to their temples, and the Sith returned to their shadows, and the galaxy continued moving forward, as it always did. But some things did not fade so easily. Stories began appearing among young Jedi students who studied the Force inside the temples of the Order. At first, these stories were little more than whispers passed between Padawans during quiet nights in the dormitories. They spoke about the Sith who could see fear, and the Sith who could reach inside a person's mind and pull their deepest nightmares into the open. Some students said she had been destroyed by a combined force of Jedi and Sith warriors long ago. Others believed something more unsettling. They believed the hidden fear had survived. The stories grew darker as they spread. Some Padawans claimed that Phobos had never truly died. They said the Sith had learned how to hide herself inside the Force itself, waiting patiently for the right moment to return. Others described her as something closer to a ghost, a presence that could appear in the mind of anyone who feared the dark side too deeply. Teachers within the Jedi Order often dismissed these tales as imagination. Young students were known to create frightening stories about ancient Sith lords. Fear had always been part of the lessons every Jedi had to confront. But the name Phobos continued appearing in those stories again and again, and the details were always strangely consistent. The hidden fear, the Sith who attacked the mind before the body, the Sith who fed on fear itself. Even among the Sith, the legend survived in a different form. Within their hidden academies, some masters spoke about Phobos with quiet caution. They remembered the chaos her cult had caused across the galaxy. They remembered how both orders had been forced to hunt her together. To some Sith, her story was not a warning. It was inspiration. Years passed, and the legend of Darth Phobos slowly changed. Within the Jedi Order, fear was never something that could simply be ignored. Every Padawan who trained in the ways of the Force eventually faced a series of difficult tests before becoming a full Jedi Knight. These tests were known as the Jedi Trials. Each trial was designed to challenge a different part of the student's mind and spirit. Some tested skill in combat. Others measured discipline, patience, and understanding of the Force. But one trial in particular focused on something far more personal: fear. This test became known as the Trial of Insight. Inside the great Jedi Temple, on the world of Coruscant, deep within the archives and hidden chambers of the Order, special simulations were created to confront Padawans with the darkness inside their own thoughts. One of those simulations carried the image of Phobos. The Jedi had studied her abilities carefully after her death, and they knew she had possessed a rare mastery of mental manipulation through the dark side of the Force. She had attacked the minds of her enemies long before her lightsaber ever struck. That made her the perfect symbol of the fear every Jedi needed to overcome. When a Padawan entered the Trial of Insight, they sometimes faced a projection of the hidden fear herself. The simulation appeared real, moving through the chamber with the same calm menace described in ancient reports. She spoke softly as she searched the student's mind. Then the illusion began revealing the fears hidden deep inside the Padawan's thoughts. Some saw visions of failure. Others saw the faces of people they were afraid of losing. The purpose of the trial was not victory. The purpose was understanding. A Jedi could not destroy fear completely, but they had to learn how to see it clearly without letting it control them. For generations, students who entered the trial remembered the same lesson. even after death. And the shadow of Phobos continued testing the minds of those who walked the path of the Force. Time moved forward. Wars came and went across the galaxy. New Sith Lords rose from the shadows, and the Jedi continued guiding the Republic through countless conflicts. Entire generations passed after the fall of Darth Phobos, yet her name never completely vanished. The story of the hidden fear survived in quiet places where history was studied carefully. The Jedi archivists preserved the records of the cult that once spread terror across distant systems. Sith scholars examined the same story with a different kind of interest. Both orders remembered the same lesson. Fear had nearly destroyed them both. Among the Jedi, the legend became part of their training. Padawans who entered the Trial of Insight often left the chamber speaking about the same encounter. A dark figure with yellow eyes, a calm voice whispering through their thoughts, and a presence that seemed to know exactly what they feared most. The students understood that the vision was only a simulation created by the Jedi Temple, but the emotions it revealed inside their minds were real. Phobos had once used those same methods against living enemies. Even the Sith remembered her differently. Some Sith masters spoke about Phobos as a warning. They believed her downfall proved that ambition without control would always lead to destruction. But other Sith saw something else in her story. They saw a glimpse of power, a Sith who had forced Jedi and Sith to unite against her. A Sith whose influence had spread through the galaxy without armies or fleets. A Sith who turned fear itself into a weapon. Over time, the truth and the legend slowly blended together. The real woman who once walked the deserts of Korriban became something larger than history. She became a myth whispered in training halls and hidden academies. The hidden fear, and perhaps that was the final victory of Darth Phobos. Her body had fallen long ago in a forgotten canyon, but the fear she understood so well never truly died. Centuries passed, yet the shadow remained. Inside the towering halls of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, generations of Jedi lived and trained without ever witnessing the ancient wars that had once shaken the galaxy. Younglings studied the Force in quiet classrooms. Padawans walked the temple corridors beside their masters, learning patience, discipline, and control. To many of them, the ancient Sith were little more than distant history, and stories written in old records, names preserved in the archives. But some names refused to fade completely. Among those names was Darth Phobos. Within the deepest sections of the Jedi Temple, the Order preserved thousands of records describing past encounters with the dark side. These archives contained lessons drawn from centuries of conflict. The Jedi believed understanding the past helped protect the future, and the story of Phobos had become one of those lessons. Just the Sith woman who once spread fear across the galaxy had been defeated long ago. Jedi and Sith warriors had united briefly to end the threat she represented. Yet her legacy remained strangely useful to the Jedi Order. Because Phobos had not simply been a warrior, she had been something far more dangerous. She attacked the mind. The Jedi understood that fear was one of the most powerful emotions a Force user could experience. If a Jedi allowed fear to control their thoughts, and it could lead them toward anger, and eventually the dark side. For that reason, the Order believed every Padawan needed to confront their fears directly, and that belief shaped one of the most difficult tests within Jedi training. Deep inside the temple, hidden chambers were used for the final trials that separated Padawans from the rank of Jedi Knight. One of those trials forced students to face visions drawn directly from the darkness inside their own minds. Over time, the image used in that trial became familiar. A figure with yellow eyes, blue hair falling across green skin, a calm voice whispering through the shadows of the chamber. For centuries after her death, the presence of Phobos continued appearing inside the Jedi Temple, not as a living Sith, but as the symbol of fear itself. The chamber was quiet. Deep inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, a young Padawan stood alone in the darkness, waiting for the trial to begin. And the walls of the chamber were smooth and ancient, illuminated only by faint light that seemed to glow from hidden sources within the stone. This was the trial of insight. For every Padawan, this moment was different. Some trials tested strength with a lightsaber. Others tested patience, courage, or wisdom. But the trial of insight challenged something far more personal. It challenged the mind. The Padawan closed their eyes and reached into the Force, trying to remain calm. And their master had warned them that what they were about to experience would not be a simple illusion. The trial would show them the truth hidden within their own thoughts. Slowly, the chamber changed. A faint ripple moved through the air, and shadows gathered along the far wall. The Force itself seemed to respond to the emotions inside the Padawan's mind, shaping the darkness into something new. A figure appeared. At first, it was only a silhouette standing motionless within the shadows. But as the Padawan focused on the presence, the image became clearer. Green skin, blue hair, yellow eyes glowing softly in the dim light. The form of Darth Phobos stepped forward slowly, her expression calm and unreadable. The simulation moved with eerie realism, mirroring the descriptions preserved in the Jedi archives. For a moment, the Padawan felt their breath grow uneven. They knew the figure was not real, yet the presence in the Force felt disturbingly authentic. Phobos tilted her head slightly, studying the student before her, as though she could see directly into their thoughts. And in a way, she could. The purpose of the trial was not to defeat the image. The purpose was to confront fear. Through the Force, the simulation began pulling fragments of emotion from the Padawan's mind. Memories surfaced without warning. Moments of doubt appeared clearly before them. The fear of failure, the fear of losing someone important, the fear of becoming something darker than they intended. Phobos spoke quietly, her voice echoing through the chamber like a whisper inside the Padawan's thoughts. She did not attack immediately. Instead, she waited. Because fear, once revealed, was already a weapon. The chamber felt smaller now. The young Padawan stood in the quiet darkness, facing the image of Darth Phobos as the Force continued shaping the illusion around them. The simulation moved with unsettling precision, and as if the ancient Sith truly understood every thought passing through the student's mind. For a moment, neither of them moved. The Padawan tightened their grip on the lightsaber hilt at their side, drawing a slow breath to steady their thoughts. Their masters had warned them that fear would appear during this trial. But hearing about fear was not the same as feeling it. Phobos stepped forward calmly, her yellow eyes studying the Padawan with quiet curiosity. There was no anger in her expression, at no obvious threat. That calmness made the moment even more unsettling. Through the Force, the chamber responded to the Padawan's emotions. Shadows along the walls shifted, forming faint images that flickered into existence like memories returning from the past. The Padawan saw familiar faces, friends from the temple, their master. Even distant memories from childhood appeared briefly before fading again. Then the images changed. Those same faces appeared again, but now they were surrounded by darkness. Some looked frightened. Others seemed to vanish slowly into shadow. The message was clear. Fear did not always appear as a monster. Sometimes it appeared as loss. The Padawan ignited their lightsaber, its blue light cutting through the dim chamber. The blade hummed softly as they stepped forward, determined not to let the illusion control their mind. Phobos smiled faintly. She moved suddenly, her double-bladed lightsaber igniting with a sharp crimson flash. The two blades spun gracefully as she advanced toward the student. Their weapons met with a burst of light. The duel that followed was not only a test of skill. Each movement carried a deeper challenge. The Padawan could feel their thoughts pulling in different directions as memories and fears continued rising within their mind. Phobos moved through the chamber like a shadow, and striking quickly and then fading back into darkness again. Her voice echoed softly through the air between each attack. She did not need to shout. Fear spoke quietly. The Padawan realized something important as the duel continued. The Sith in front of them was not truly trying to win the battle. She was trying to reveal something, every fear they carried inside themselves. The duel inside the chamber did not end with victory. The Padawan eventually lowered their lightsaber, breathing slowly as the image of Darth Phobos faded back into the shadows of the chamber. The force around them grew calm again, and the visions that had surrounded them slowly disappeared. The trial was over, but the lesson remained. Inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, generations of students had faced the same moment. Each one entered the trial of insight, expecting to defeat an enemy. Yet the trial was never truly about combat. It was about understanding. Fear could not simply be destroyed with a lightsaber. It existed within every mind, waiting quietly beneath the surface. Even the most disciplined Jedi could feel its presence when doubt appeared. Phobos had understood that truth better than most Sith. Long before the Jedi turned her image into a training simulation, she had discovered how powerful fear could be when it was used correctly. She had built an entire cult by revealing the hidden doubts inside the minds of others. She had turned fear into loyalty. She had turned fear into obedience. And for a brief moment in history, she had turned fear into something strong enough to challenge both Jedi and Sith at the same time. The Jedi remembered that lesson carefully. To them, Phobos represented a warning, a reminder that the dark side often began with a single emotion left unchecked. But among the Sith, her story carried a different meaning. Some Sith masters spoke about her with quiet respect, and they believed her rise had revealed a deeper truth about the dark side. Not every Sith conquered worlds. Not every Sith ruled armies. Some Sith ruled something far more powerful. They ruled fear itself. And in that way, the legend of the hidden fear never truly disappeared from the galaxy. Her body had fallen long ago. Her cult had eventually faded into history. But the shadow she left behind still lingered in the minds of those who studied the Force. And because some Sith are remembered for the battles they win, and others are remembered for the fear they leave behind.